Mr. Doherty?
Here.
Bennett? Dr. Schwartz-Now?
Here.
Mrs. Mossberg?
Here. And I will note that
So moved.
Mr. Doherty moved
Second.
and Mrs. Washburn seconded. I don't believe there are any changes since it was posted on board docs as far as the agenda order is concerned. Any questions or discussion? Mr. Giuffre, can we vote on that?
Mr. Doherty?
Yes.
Mossberg?
Yes.
Dr. Lewis?
Yes,
Dr. Schwartz-Now?
Yes.
motion carried. I'd like to welcome our guests this evening, and most are going to be introduced in a little bit. So we won't do any introductions right now. I will ask that you rise and join with us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Again, welcome our guests. We have lots of administrators here with us this evening. We have some young runners. We hope they run for a little bit. They'll wait till they get introduced. We have some photography students who are here, so we have a very nice audience. So you're all welcome here. I will note that the first three items on our agenda are to approve minutes. And normally I would ask that if we could throw them all together in one agenda, but we've got a couple of corrections on one of them. So it won't take us too long, I don't think, to do them all. So can we do one item to approve September 21st, September 22nd, and October 10th? Then I'll make that.
Second.
Doherty. For those board members who weren't part of submitting corrections to minutes, there were just a couple of things that needed to be corrected. There are links that are either corrected or being worked on, so that when they're published as minutes, the links will be correct. And then Mr. Doherty had found a couple of changes in the September 21st minutes. Who moved and who seconded and who abstained in the vote. And so you've got those fixed. So what we are doing then in this motion is approving those minutes as you read them on board docs and as corrected, with a couple of corrections on the votes for 21-105 and 21-106. And thanks to Mr. Doherty for finding that. Any questions or discussion? Okay, can we vote on that?
Dr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Doherty?
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn?
Yes.
Dr. Schwartz-Now?
Yes.
Microphone over to Mr. Broadwater. Presentations or a couple of recognitions to do this evening.
Yes, we do. Very good. Thank you. Good evening. Tonight, we're going to recognize the Loveland Intermediate School Runners Club. We have the advisor, Steve Fetterman, is here. Steve has been doing Runners Club for 20 years. All fifth and sixth graders are welcome to come and run or walk. It not only provides exercise and fitness opportunities, but it also gives students a chance to socialize with their friends outside and stay off a device, which is always nice for the kids. Several other teachers help with the program, and we have a dedicated group of parents who walk with us and also help us supervise. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve Fetterman. Steve?
Oh, that's okay.
All right, we were very honored that we got this invitation and we were all very excited about it. But, you know, the real reason we're here is not for me to talk, but for them to tell you about Runners Club. And I will tell you about this group. They put together the presentation themselves. They were very excited to do it. And these guys are not only good runners, but they are also great people and great students. So I'm going to turn it over to them.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Owen Mayer.
Ryan Soleto.
Alex Hill.
Nora Mack.
Griffin Joyner.
And Brinley Sherman. We are some of the participants of the 5th grade and 6th grade Loveland Intermediate School Runners Club.
We have Runners Club on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. This is nice because you get a day off in between Runners Club days so that you can rest and do other activities.
One of the pros of Runners Club is that kids can run or walk based on how they're feeling that day. This allows kids to walk or run at their own pace.
Runners Club has had 207 people register. There are around 160 kids that run or walk daily.
Sometimes parents or teachers run and walk with the kids. That helps the kids gain confidence.
Mr. Fetterman is a big part of Runners Club. He makes sure that you are having a good time and he is very supportive of everyone.
Runners Club takes place outside. It is very nice because people get outdoors, fresh air, and exercise.
Now, Alex, Nora, and Brinley will tell everyone about their experiences as runners.
I have had an excellent experience at Runners Club. I like how you can talk to your friends and get plenty of exercise. When I run, I like to have good conversations with my friends. I also enjoy how you can keep track of your time and see if you're improving at running or walking. Finally, I like how you can get outside and enjoy the fresh air.
I think Runners Club is beneficial because I can talk to my friends and get lots of exercise. I was told to join Runners Club by my parents, but now that I've done it more and more, I enjoy it greatly. My experiences with Runners Club have been phenomenal. When I was running once, my friend caught up to me when we laughed and had a very good time. So as you can see, Runners Club is very fun and beneficial.
I think Runners Club is an outstanding thing to do after school. I love it because I get to pace myself. Every time I beat my PR, I get so happy. As you can see, this is why we all love Runners Club. Thank you for listening. I hope you have a great rest of your night.
I don't know if the board could tell, but if you hold up these papers, Mr. Fetterman had them prepare what they were going to speak, and they were diligent and did different colors for the different people that are speaking. And you guys did a fantastic job. Thank you, Mr. Fetterman, for bringing that in. So great job. And I have a Loveland Tiger magnet for you. There you go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And it was all delivered perfectly.
It was great. Thank you. Well, thank you. And you do not have, thanks to the families for coming as well. You do not have to stay for our meeting. We're happy to have had you here. And we're glad to see you head home to do homework. All right, Mr. Brewer, I think you also have another recognition.
I do. 1.8. We have our photography students from the high school. They had the enviable task of taking the picture of all of our administrators and board members this evening and attempting to make us look good. So because we have all of our principals present here, we thought it'd be a good time to get the photos of everybody. So I want to say thank you to our students from Loveland High School Photography 2 class. Carter Pendlum, who's in grade 11, helped us. We have Srinivas Shankar, who is in grade 11, who helped us, and David Nash, who's in grade 12, who helped us with the pictures. They've been working behind the scenes to get new headshots for our board members, principals, and central office team for the website. It's a great opportunity to give them some professional photography experience. They're also getting paid in pizza, which got them here. So it's a win for the district. I also want to thank Jim Barrett, who's our Loveland High School photography teacher, for coordinating with our students and helping make this happen. I also want to thank Andrew Setters, our communications consultant, for getting this all set up, working with Mr. Barrett, and being able to do this evening. So I say thank you, and to the students and to Mr. Barrett, come on up, and I have a little Loveland Tiger gift for you as well.
Thank you, guys. I look forward to seeing the results.
Thank you very much. You did a great job. Their directions were clear. They knew what they were doing. It looks like they took okay pictures. You all very much.
Thank you.
On to presentations, and that will be the school improvement update will come first. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Broadwater. My mic's not working. I'm not muted. Working now? Okay. Hopefully we can fill in the blanks in the minutes or whatever was missing. Mr. Broadwater, school improvement update.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to, I'm going to introduce Andrea Connor, who's our assistant superintendent in charge of teaching and learning. This is the time of the year where we have our principals come in and do a presentation on some of the state assessment data that we have received. I'm excited to be able to share that. I can tell you that I know I wasn't here last year, but when I look at our data, I can tell that our building principals and our staff really worked very, very hard to do everything they possibly could for our kids to get them in to take the assessment, as well as take care of them, whether it was online, not online. I received a very nice email, I think the board did also this evening, stating how while remote learning was difficult, they appreciate everything that our administrators did and that our staff did. And I think it speaks volumes for the type of staff and the type of administrators we have here at Loveland. I'm very proud to be a part of it, and we're excited to share the data. I know that Andrea ran off. You have a hard copy of the update that our principals are going to go through. What I want to encourage the Board of Education to do is just kind of go through, take notes, allow our principals to get through the presentation, because you'll probably notice some of your questions might get answered by the ensuing administrator. And then at the end, we'd be happy to take any questions, and our principals are excited to kind of brag about all the achievements they have. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrea Connor and let her present.
Okay, this is actually one of my favorite board meeting evenings, because all of you get to get a glimpse of the wonderful staff and principals primarily that we get to work with in central office. And I think by the end of the evening, you will see exactly what we see. Like, I'm always like, our principals have it, you know, like it's good. Our kids are taken care of, our kids are learning, and it's because of the people that are sitting back here that you're going to get to hear from, kind of showcase their data, as well as some of the plans they have moving forward with some things and that we know that we need to continue to work on. So if you recall last spring, when I spoke with you guys about the school improvement process, there was a timeline, I believe it was probably about December, where I said, this is when we start doing things. You know, in a school system, it's continual. You're always in the, at this time of the year, October through November, December, thinking about the following school year already, while you're still executing the plan that you already have in place for the current school year. So it is a continual process. This is information we talk about every month when we check in with the principals at our check-in meeting. So I want everybody to know that we take this very seriously, and you're just going to be really excited here in a few minutes when you hear from these people. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, because I'm going to pull up the presentation. So I believe I might need a little assistance. It says host disabled it.
Mike, if we
Yeah.
have questions during a principal's presentation, should we still hold everything until the end? Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I'll wait until the end.
So hopefully if you can maybe buy the slide, you know, that's why I put 4 on a slide and said, I don't know about you, I need them to be a little larger now. So my hope is that that will give you like the cue to go back and ask that question if you're not able to, if we don't answer it throughout the process. So while we're waiting for tech to allow me to share my screen, I do want to, as we get into this discussion, think a little bit about the students that are behind the data. So we can find ourselves get really caught up in what, you know, how a test score looks or what a number means, and you can really get into a lot of this state report card data and spend a lot of time in it. Some of it tells an accurate picture, some of it not so much, and so that's why it's important to have the principals here to tell their story. But also I always like to encourage people to remember that children are behind the numbers. And so when you hear our principals talk, that will come through very clearly. So I'm trying to figure out why I can't share my. Yep. Right. I think we might be up now. Can everyone see my screen? Awesome. Okay, so I want to go ahead and jump in. So Ms. Washburn will appreciate this. So every teacher starts a lesson with kind of their learning targets or the lesson that they're hoping that all of us get throughout the presentation or the lesson that you're delivering. So I thought it was appropriate that I start with maybe our learning targets for this particular lesson tonight, and that everyone watching and that the school board will understand what the purpose of this particular presentation is for. So the first thing that I want everyone to understand is that we're going to take a minute to just consider some reflections. I'm going to throw some things out and we're going to kind of just take a look at them. Also, I wanted to present kind of an overview of some of the educational research pertaining to what I like to call learning opportunities, not the COVID loss. So unfortunately, we have a group of children that are living in this term called COVID loss. And I like to switch that a little bit and just say, you know what, it's a learning opportunity. When we approach things in a negative tone, that everything is a loss, after a while, I feel like maybe our children and our students hear that, and that we need to understand it's just a moment in time and that everybody's working very hard to make sure that that is regained. So I like to switch that and call that a learning opportunity. Also, we're going to be giving you an overview of the Loveland City School District 2021 report card. Also, the principals are going to present academic data, including what's called gap closing from the last school year, 2020, 2021. Also, our principals are going to talk a little bit about maybe some of our current data and what we're seeing with students, and maybe some of our improvement plans and how we're going to approach some of the things that we're seeing. And then I also wanted to call out that we have some resources with links to more information in the appendices that's at the end. So some of the information in the presentation will be cited to like NWEA or the U.S. Department of Education. And so those full reports are at the very end of the presentation, just if anybody wants to take a look at those to review those. I think one thing that we need to kind of take a look at is this graphic. And I know if you are on social media, you may have seen it if you follow any educational networks, as well as Mr. Broadwater included this in one of our Tiger Talks. And I think this is a perfect place to start and just to take a moment to maybe look at where our seniors, our 12th grade students are, and take a look at perhaps where our second grade students are. So for our current seniors, our current 12th grade students, the last year that they had what is considered a quote unquote normal school year was in the 9th grade. If you think about your high school experience, a lot happens between 9th grade and 12th grade. There has been a lot of disruption. So when we start talking about things, we start looking at things, that I believe is something we need to take a look at. When Kevin Fancher and Sarah Gehring are up here and they're talking about their K2 learners, I think it's very important to look at our little second graders. Our second grade kids have not had quote unquote a normal school year ever, right? And so I think this graphic is just a really nice illustration of that. And for us, again, to remember, children are behind the numbers. So when we start talking about some of this, I think probably a lot of our parents who have children these ages could probably go, yep, I think that's probably a very real thing, right? So another reflection I want you guys to think about is in the spring of 2020, school shut down. State testing was canceled. Everyone was trying to figure out how to finish that particular school year. So last fall, which would have been the fall of 2020, the report card for 2019-2020 was released. And when they released it, it had not a whole lot on it, right? So basically, I said it was a report card. I put it in quotation marks because it really was just, hey, this is what we have. State testing data was not on it. So therefore, if you didn't generate state testing data, there were a lot of those other measures that were not able to be calculated. So just to keep that in mind, the spring of 2020, there is a hole in data in the state and in every state. And that's just something to keep in the back of your mind. Last year at this time, if you recall, our principals came and presented and they reminded all of us that they didn't have tests. So here is our map data. Here's what we know about kids now. That's our own internal vendor data that we use for instruction, that we administer the assessments, the teachers take the data, they make adjustments to the instructions, they create groups. Our principals are going to be talking about that tonight in detail, so you'll get a chance to hear how that looks in each of our buildings. I also want to call out that in House Bill 67 and the accountability waiver that was approved by the U.S. Department of Education provided some flexibility for the Ohio report cards for this past school year. There was an acknowledgement of this year is going to continue to be a challenge. So the report card that is currently visible, that everyone can see, that was released on October 14th, has most of the data that's reported, but it doesn't have letter grades assigned. And that was part of the requirement of that House bill that was a result of that waiver, that U.S. Department of Education waiver. If you notice in this presentation, there is a blue link there. I'm not going to click on that right now. This link is also included at the end of the presentation. This link takes you to an overview. So simply, it's a PDF document that says, this is the measure, this is reportable. It'll say letter grade, yes or no. So I think that would be really helpful if people really want to start digging into that, is to have this document beside them as they start to dig into what the data actually means. I also wanted to call out, so we spend all this time, you gotta love education, because every about 10 years they decide they're gonna change everything. So I think this last bullet point is really important to call out for everyone, is that starting with this school year, 2021, 2022, the school report cards, which will come out the fall of 2022, this time next year, are moving from letter grades, and they are going to be a star system. That's all we know. There's a star rating system. So you got to love it when you figure out how they're measuring you and giving you the game plan, all of a sudden they switch it on you. So we'll stay tuned on that one and figure out where it all lands. So I wanted to share a little bit of what we know from the educational research. I have two sources here, NWEA and the U.S. Department of Education. I think it's important to call out what they consider learning loss as a result of the COVID-19 disruptions. So we know that students grew. We know that last school year, even with challenges, whether that was in person, online learning, a little bit of both, all the back and forth, that we know students learned. There were gains that were made. However, what data tells us, it was at a lower rate than what we typically see. We also know that any of the spring achievement declines that we're looking at are more evident for students in grades 3 through 5. We also know from NWEA research that students' achievement at the end of 2020-2021 school year was lower compared to pre-pandemic levels with larger declines in math. And our principals will be talking about some of that as they go through their section of the presentation. I really think the next two bullets are really important because we know at this particular age level, a lot happens in a student's life. So by last winter, late elementary and early middle school students were about 8 to 11 weeks behind mid-year expectations in math. By last winter, late elementary and early middle school students were about 6 to 10 weeks behind expectations in reading. So we know that there were certain groups of students, age levels of students that research is showing us were impacted differently than other groups. Probably really important to note as our principals go through their what's called gap closing slides, you're going to see that our subgroup populations of students mirror a lot of what this final bullet on this slide notes. While all students experienced academic challenges, students in some subgroups experience wider disparities in academic growth than others. And I think you're definitely going to see that in what our principals present. So I wanted to go over just the achievement component of the report card. Again, you can spend, if I went through every piece of this report card, we would be here till tomorrow. So I'm just wanting to focus for tonight's purpose and for what the principals are presenting just a little bit on the achievement component. And before I do that, I do want to call out that there was a mistake in the Cincinnati Enquirer concerning our third grade ELA scores. They noted that Loveland, among other schools, performed below state average on that measure. That is not accurate. Loveland performed below the 80%, the proficiency level, and Ms. Foreign, when she's up here, will talk a little bit about that. So we, in fact, scored much higher than state average. So I think that was a misprint on the part of the paper. So I just wanted to be sure that everybody listens closely as Ms. Foreign explains that, because I think that will clarify a little bit the difference between a state average and a difference between a proficiency average. Those are two very different things. So currently, in the current report card that we're talking about, there are two ways that your achievement components are measured. It's measured one way by the indicators met. Those are basically your test results and the percentage of students that are performing what's considered proficient. On this report card, that is 80%. Okay. The other piece that's important to really note is what's called the performance index, or the PI. So your performance index measures test results of every student, no matter what level that student came in to the table. Points are awarded for every student who takes a test. So it is to your advantage to try to think of ways to get more of your students tested than not. Also, there's the higher achievement level. The higher the student's achievement level, the more students you have in those higher categories, the more points are awarded to the school district. It also really, in essence, rewards your schools and districts for improving performance of all students, not just your high students, or not just saying we want to get you to the 80%. Maybe you already have a student that's 80%, but you get rewarded for getting that student to perhaps much higher. Something important to note that we do know about the report card that is going to change for this particular school year. Your performance index is going to be how achievement is measured. Indicators met that will be reported, but it is not a graded measure. So you're basically going to see how students scored on the tests, like how many percentage, what percentage they're at, but it's not going to be included in your overall achievement measure. Here's just a screenshot of how our performance index was calculated. So if you go on the department's website and look up Loveland City Schools, you can look at this measure through this calculation chart that I'm showing on this slide. You can look at it from a pie chart. You can look at it, and I'm going to show you in a minute, on the trend. But if you take a look at this, you'll see that we had 0.6% of our students score at what's considered the advanced plus level. So Advanced Plus, let's say you have a student that's considered accelerated. So you have a student perhaps in 8th grade who's taking a high school mathematics course. If that's any of those students score in the advanced category, they're automatically, your school district's automatically rewarded as Advanced Plus. So you get kind of a little bit of a bonus. And if you notice, you get 1.3 points for that. You can see how all these different categories are broken down. You will also see that 29.7% of our students were the advanced, 24.6 in accelerated, 21.7 in proficient, 11.2 in basic, 10.5 in limited. And I have to just rest on this untested for a minute, because this is something that I feel that the principals and the staff at Loveland worked very hard on last year. We only had overall 1.6% of our students not test. That was huge. That is huge. Because what we did was get a little bit creative in how we were able to do that. So if you recall, we had a few days where some of our in-person learners were learning asynchronously, so that we were able to open up spacing and allow our families who had chose online learning as an option to bring their students in and feel that they were safe enough to bring their children in to test. All of the principals, all the people sitting behind me did an amazing job with that, reassuring our families that we would make sure that their kids were safe. And I honestly believe that's why we had such a great turnout in testing. Again, only 1.6 of our total group chose not to test. Okay, and I think that's important to kind of point out. I also wanted to show this in a different graph. So this is the trend. 2020, you kind of have to mark that out. There's some limited data in 2020. In other words, like, let's say your high school people who were retaking assessments, or some of those things that were happening like in the summers or the fall, would report in this 2020 category. But I want you to know that if you look at this trend, you really need to look at 2017, 2018, 2019, skip 2020 and go over to 2021, because it gives you a better picture. So our performance index in 2019, which would have been from the 2018-2019 school year, was at 101.1. If you take a look at that performance index, compare it to the performance index on the report card that was just released, that's still pretty favorable considering everything that we've had to the challenges we've had to work through and go through. But our principals will be able to talk about this a little bit more as we move forward. Here's another, just a little screenshot of something that we wanted to share with you. So you can go onto the Ohio Department of Education and basically search any school district, and you can also download just files of data. And again, you can get pretty caught up into this. So what I typically do is try to make myself focus on a few things that are applicable and I think that are going to be beneficial, and then I'll go back in at other times when my schedule's a little bit lighter and dig into other things. And the principals can tell you there will be times I email somebody and say, hey, I was working on this for you, I'd noticed this, and share it with them, or hey, here's something you guys might want to consider. So as I downloaded this data, and of course it's huge because it's I downloaded every public school in Ohio, and then I searched just region 13, which are the regions, schools around us. And then I just kind of did a search. So this is ranked, if you look at that performance index percent, it's kind of highlighted in like an orangish color there. The second column, that just shows you our index percentage. And then on the left column, Forest Hills and Loveland's pretty even. I've dug into their data, I've dug in ours. So it just calculates as us being pretty even there. But I wanted to call this out because if you look at the percent of students not tested to the right, that gives you a glimpse of maybe perhaps how different schools approach testing, which could have been very different from us. Basically what the State Department said was, oh, you lead with safety first, but we're still going to penalize you if you don't test kids. That's basically what they said to us. So yes, don't make people come in to test if they're not comfortable, number one, but number two, please know we're going to still hold you accountable. They didn't give us a waiver on that one. So, but again, I think our 1.6% shows that we had set up a pretty good method of allowing our families to feel safe. Also, when the principals are talking through their data, you'll see how many of our kids scored, which kind of helps populate this performance index measure. This one I'm really proud of too, because if you recall, the report card for this school year is going to be based more on your performance index than your indicators met. In some ways, it's going to feel more fair in how it rates schools because it's looking at the performance of all kids, right? Like we're improving all children. And so I think that's probably important to call out and to remember. So I want to take you, whoops, fast forwarded there way too early, got excited. So I wanted to remind you about the academic excellence commitment last spring that the Board of Education worked on. So, you know, if you remember the school improvement timeline, you guys do all this amazing work in the board meetings and we take it as a group and we kind of look at what guidance you've given us and then we take it back and we put it into practice. So if you take a look at this goal, it says through personalized learning opportunities and exposure to diverse worldviews, we will chart a clear path for all students to evolve and succeed as enthusiastic, lifelong learners. And so I wanted just to kind of put that back out front of us to say our principals are talking about where they are with their academics. And then we are going to do this really what I consider a very nice tag team approach to some of our groups here. And again, I encourage the board to jot down your questions next to the slide. And we're going to make sure we have plenty of time at the end for you guys. If we don't answer it in the presentation, which I bet we will, most of your questions answer. And if not, these people and myself will be happy to do that. Again, you guys I'm excited because you're going to get to see why I enjoy really working with these professionals. So I'm going to start out with our Loveland Early Childhood Center and our Loveland Primary School, which is pre-K through 2. And this is Sarah Gehring, who is our principal at LECC, Loveland Early Childhood Center, and Kevin Fancher, who is our principal at Loveland Primary School.
Hello, good evening. I'm Sarah Gehring, the principal at LECC, and we just want to thank you for having us this evening to talk about our buildings and celebrate them. I do want to say that the LIS students kind of put my notes to shame. I'm going to have to learn some of those strategies to better organize in preparation for my presentation next time. Okay. Here we go.
So again, I'm Kevin Fancher, principal at Loveland Primary School, and I appreciate the opportunity to come talk to the board and also to our community virtually. The screen that you're currently looking at is our state data for LECC and LPS. And what you in general will see is that LPS and LECC were considered to be feeder schools. So we really don't have a lot of state data. We have a lot of internal measures, but the one piece of state data that we do have is called the K3 literacy score that we get. And it basically measures how well our students do on a state diagnostic assessment. So the blue and red bars at the bottom are indicators of just the entire school and grade levels of students that are on track for reading and not on track based on the state diagnostic. And then there's some individual measures up at the top that we'll talk about individually in just a second. So there is a building K3 literacy measure, and then there is a district K3 measure. So the ones that you're seeing in front of you are the building, but there is also a district measure that shows up on our state report card as well. The thing to note is that buildings only get credit for when you report a student that is not on track for reading in the fall of that school year. So September 30th of their fall school year, you only get credit at the building if they, one, stay in your building, and then September of the following school year, they move to on track. So it's a very short window to get some of our most needy students to be on track. And it also includes 3 summer months. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well separately. But what the point that you also see on your screen is this percentile on there. That is not a traditional letter grade. And in that sense, it is actually a percentage of students that move to that on track status from the previous school year that were reported off track.
So just a couple of things to highlight about LECC's data. As you can note on the top part of this graphic, we show that at the start during the diagnostic period for assessment for our students in kindergarten in the 1920 school year, we had 4 students that were reported as off track. This data also is inclusive of our school building not operating in person, and so having that impact of COVID. And we are celebrating the fact that due to the intensive instructional supports that were put into place for those students, we were able to move to only 2 students in the first grade diagnostic period being off track. So I want to celebrate the dedication and the support of our LACC team in providing intensive instructional supports for those students, as well as the shared partnership with our families in moving those students forward. You'll also, I want to note and celebrate the amount of blue that's at the bottom for our building, and looking at kindergarten and first grade, and looking at the overall majority of our students in kindergarten and first grade during the diagnostic period of the 2020-21 school year being on track based on the expected standards for literacy for those school years. I do want to also note that moving forward after this year, LACC will not be reporting out first grade information, since first grade has now shifted to LPS, and so that information will be provided under the LPS for next year, data next year.
So as Mrs. Garing kind of pointed out, it really is a celebration. If you think about the students, so for the LPS slide there, you see that there were 20 students who were reported as not on track in September of their first grade year. Then almost 50% of those students who were reported as not on track were moved to on track in 6 months plus 3 months of summer slide. So when you sit there and think about that particular group of those students, it really is a celebration that you move almost half of your non on track of the students who struggle the most with picking up early literacy skills to on track in such a short window of time, when the research will tell you it takes a couple of years to accomplish that. So even though that 50% and 45%, like if you see those as a traditional grade, that'd be like something, oh, I don't like that. We are really excited about that, because it shows that we worked really hard as a staff and as buildings to move those students to on track status. And then underneath that, you'll see a letter grade kind of key. And so the state waits until they get a scale back from all of that data, and then they create what equates to that letter grade on the current state report card. So right now, if you were in that range, it would be a C for both of the buildings.
Okay, I'm going to touch base about the kindergarten readiness assessment. This is an entry point assessment that we are required by the state of Ohio to work through with our first year kindergarten students during the first few months of school. So currently we are still in a testing window for the KRA that ends at the end of this month. We're still working through providing this assessment for students. We even have new students enrolling currently that are starting tomorrow that will be completing the KRA before the end of next week. Just a couple things to note about the KRA. The goal of this is to look at what students know when they come to us. What do they already know, and what can they do in the following areas? So we're looking at skills in the areas of language and literacy, mathematics, physical, being, and motor development, and then social foundations that include their social emotional development and their approach towards learning. The LECC teachers directly interact with students to gather this data for the KRA. It's not a major, like we sit in a large group and they're assigned an assessment and we collect it. It's a very ongoing, very interactive assessment period. We collect the data through observations, teachers using scripted prompts to ask questions about a story or a picture, and students respond to that with answer choices as well as performance tasks. As you can see from our data over the past few years, our Loveland Tiger Cubs traditionally come to LACC with the skills that the state of Ohio believes is appropriate at entering the kindergarten level. I think it's important to note, and you'll hear from my colleagues tonight, that our students that start with us at LACC start and they gain and they build upon those foundational skills that they come to us with, and they continue to build mastery and skill development that's important for them as future Tigers. And I hope that you get to see that demonstration of our positive growth of our students that start with us at LACC. Oh, sorry. So the data. Oh, sorry. I guess I should talk about the data. As you can see, we are, and as I've shared with you tonight, we are not finished with the current school year's KRA testing window yet. Just looking at some tentative data that I was able to take a look at so far in the K-Ready system, our students are about average or above average when we look at previous state overall score averaging. And this is true of years past, that our Tiger Cubs come in at or above the expected level of skill development for our kindergarten students. So as you can see, last year, we didn't have a finalized score, but we did end the testing period, as the KRA can demonstrate for our district, with an overall score of 270.6, and the state average for the KRA was 267.1.
So the next slide that you're going to look at is our early literacy skills measure. So if you think about a medical analogy, when you go to a doctor's office, they take your temperature and your blood pressure. That's really what early literacy skills do, is they just check. It's a quick measure, but it's an indicator for their overall reading health. And when they score at the benchmarks, then statistically, they're going to be able to successfully navigate the path to becoming a successful reader. So the thing to note about that benchmark is that the benchmark changes throughout the school year. So this is your fall data for both of our buildings. You're going to see here in just a couple seconds. And the students who are at the expected fall benchmark are in green. And then that benchmark changes throughout the school year. The ideal cone that we strive for, that we kind of dream about, is an 80%. So the closer we have to that green, we really want it to be 80%. And then you have 15% in your tier 2, and then 5% in your tier 3, which is the red. You also notice in our graphs that fall 2020 data is missing. As you may recall, when we presented last year, we were implementing a new measure, map reading fluency. And we found out, honestly, that piece of data wasn't what we were used to getting from AIMSweb. So we made the decision to go back to AIMSweb and change that assessment to better meet the needs of our students, because the map reading fluency just didn't give us the robust data that we needed to make decisions about our students.
Okay, so for LECC, this AIMSweb data that you're seeing, I have placed the fall 2018, fall 2019 information, so pre-COVID, and then the current fall 2021 data. The early literacy composite for kindergarten combines letter naming fluency data and letter word sound fluency data to come up with where students fall within this tier transitional cone that you see. We use this data to monitor our kindergarten students in order to inform our core curriculum instructional planning and to provide small group intervention and progress monitoring for students that may fall within that yellow or red area of the tiered cone that you see. Just to let you understand a little bit about last year, LECC did not provide pull-out reading intervention support as in years past, due to the impact of COVID and the need to provide additional in-person classroom instruction with a teacher and to reduce our classroom ratio of students to teacher. So general education teachers were providing the tiered support within their classroom for those students that fell in the area of need for progress monitoring and more intensive reading intervention. So as you can see that this assessment is administered one-to-one. We started it around August 30th of this year, so we were roughly 1 week into the school year. We do note that our green area in comparison to previous years has shrunk. And so we're using that information to inform decisions and how we are informing our core curriculum approaches for our students around building these literacy skills around letter recognition, identification, and letter sound correspondence. I can note that we had our first Tiger Cub check-in. That is an internal process for us to meet with general education teachers and other staff within the LECC team. And we are already noting significant growth for those students that were in the yellow or red areas. And hopefully that we can continue to provide those supports, those wraparound supports, that they'll slowly move into the green. And that's our hope. And I can say that historically speaking, our green grows significantly by the end of the kindergarten year for our Tiger Cubs.
So this next slide that you're looking at is LPS AIMSweb data. And the first thing that may jump out at you is that first grade cone. And so the first thing I wanted to point out about the first grade cone is this is students reading connected text. So this is the first time our students are measured in that way. And so we normally see a dip in that first grade data, at least in the fall of the school year. And as Sarah said, historically, our students move more and more into that green, and the yellow and red significantly shrinks. So I pulled together pre-pandemic data and our current data. So what you see above the cute pictures of LPS students is our first grade pre-pandemic data. We enjoyed basically 62% of our students coming in at that benchmark. There is a significant difference there for us to see that only 52% of our kids are at that benchmark. I think it is impacted by some of the COVID things that happened with not pulling kindergarten students out last year to give tier 2 and tier 3 interventions in that pull out service model. I think it does show in that data, but we do expect somewhat of a dip because that's the first time students have seen that kind of assessment before. The good news with the second grade data is that historically, we on a 3-year average pre-pandemic, 69-70% of our kids are in that established benchmark. And so our current data is pretty close to that. And what it shows, it illustrates that there is some recovery as students become established readers. So K1, they are really learning decoding strategies, becoming readers. And what you see more and more as you get into second and then into third grade with Mrs. Foreign is our kids are readers and they start reading to learn instead of learning to read. And as you become established readers, the cone gets better and better. Again, we would like to see 80% in that cone. And so we know where we're at and we know the work we have to do. And our data reviews are going to be focused on making sure that our kids do what they have historically done. And that's move into that green and established benchmark, even though that benchmark continues to rise throughout the school year.
Okay, next, I just want to take a look at our reading and math map data for our kindergarten students for this current school year. So the map assessment results provide our LECC educators with the information that they need to inform instructional planning for intervention, for enrichment opportunities, and to also strengthen the core curriculum instruction that we're providing in reading and math. We provide this assessment 3 times a year. So this is our first fall benchmark. So we'll do this again in the winter and springtime. Just a couple things to keep in mind about this data. We completed this assessment after about roughly 4 weeks of instruction. This measures what students know and what they are ready to learn. It's a computer adaptive assessment and it adjusts to students' answers. So if students continue to answer questions incorrectly, it does adjust to make questions easier. If students answer questions correctly, then it does become more challenging as they progress through the assessment. This is for many of our students, if not the majority of our students, their first time navigating a computer-based, a technology-based assessment. This is an assessment that we do as a large group, or some students took it in a small group setting. It is their first time interacting with headphones and having an assessment read to them, as well as having to navigate how to click and drop. So it can be a little confusing for them, especially this first benchmark around. And so it's important to note that students' attitudes toward this test can impact their score. Yet I'm happy to celebrate that our Tiger Cubs, the majority of our students fell within the high average to high range when they completed this assessment in both reading and math. As you can see, in reading, 56% of our Tiger Cubs scored in the high average to high area. And then for math, it was 69%. This information is being utilized by our teams, our kindergarten teams, to inform instruction. It's really nice to hear conversations during our kindergarten meetings about, hey, I need to link up with some of our higher level reading books or sets in our Being a Reader core curriculum to ensure that we're providing not only intervention, but also enrichment for our Tiger Cubs in the classroom.
So the first thing about the LPS map data that you may notice for first grade in previous years prior to 2021, there's 2 data sets. That's because we had an LECC group and an LPS group. Courtesy of some work that Mr. Ames and decisions that our superintendent and board and central office made, our first grade's been reunited. So 2021, a celebration for us is just getting that first grade team together and then starting to look at that data as a whole and not two separate buildings. The thing that should stand out in a celebration for a principal is looking at the percentage of students that score in the average to that high average range. MAP is broken into quintiles. And so when you look at those high average and high groups, those are the top 2 quintiles. And we have a high percentage of our students that continue to score in those areas. And that's compared to that national group. So that's that second column there in MAP is the norm grade level mean RIT score. And that's for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of kids that take that assessment across the nation and possibly around the world. And what you'll see when you look down that first column is our students, even in the face of the pandemic, even in the face of these challenges, they're continuing to score above average. So the next slide you're going to see is our second grade data. And the same thing holds true for that as well. We have students who continue to score well above average. Our mean RIT score across the board is higher than the norm RIT score. What you will notice as well on this slide is something that Andrea pointed out, and that our students started to, the deficit there with math started to show up in the second grade data. So you see a little bit of a drop there when you look at what we traditionally see in our students for second grade math. And that's really when you compare 2020 to 2019 and in previous school years. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Mrs. Foran to share the rest of our students' journey as they become older learners.
Thank you, Mr. Fancher. Well, it's always nice to have the opportunity to come and talk about the school that I'm so proud to be a part of, and to kind of brag on the very talented staff and the awesome kids that are at LES for grades 3 and 4. So I'm going to start out with report card info. Typically, it's just third graders who have their first experience with state testing. But for this year, it's both third and fourth grade because we didn't have state testing that year previous. So you can see that this represents ELA and math for both third and fourth grade. That's what their tested subject areas are. And the state sets a standard of 80%. That's a passing rate. How many of your kids, just flat out, how many of your kids passed at 80, and we need 80% of those to do so. So you can look here and see that these aren't the typical numbers that we see for our passing rate in Loveland. But we're really quite proud of these numbers, and I'll show you that in just a minute. The cutoff is 80%. In 2 of the areas, we met that. In fourth grade ELA, it was a 79.5, which when I went to school, you rounded up with a 5. So, I mean, and then third grade ELA, we did not meet that. However, we do see that impact of COVID. I think that we see that there. And, Andrea mentioned that we did have some gaps that were created. However, well, it's tough to look at, and it's hard to not see passing the 80 for all of us. We're very competitive. We want our kids to, do a great job. They really did when you look at this next slide. So if we move on to the next slide, this shows us the comparative data for the state passing rate. The first number there under the state average is the percent proficient. The next number is the average scale score. So the score that the student actually got on the test. So if you look at our percent proficient, we are 22 to 27 points higher than the state. If you look at our average scale score, we're 25 to 41% higher. In fact, our scores were so good that today we got an email from the US News and World Report that Loveland LES ranked in the top 30% of Ohio. And so LES was named to the US News and World Report Best Elementary School list. So that is just such a tribute to my staff at LES, their hard work and our kiddos' perseverance through what was a really difficult, tough year for them. So we are just super proud. Although we want those 80% and higher, we're still going to celebrate because this really is a reflection of some great work. Okay, next slide. So I get the fun job of showing you gap closing slides. These are probably the most difficult, the most difficult metric that's in the report card. What this report does, kind of in a nutshell, is it breaks everything, every student down into a subgroup. You have to have 15 students to have a reported subgroup. So you're going to see that first in black there, that's the different subgroups. The next one says test took number. That means how many students in that subgroup took that particular test. Then it's rated on their performance index. Andrea kind of went over how you earn scores in performance index. It's based on the level of score that a student got within the test. What we're hoping for is a green mark in that green shadow. The green shading means that we hit the mark, which was based on a previous year's performance index and a goal. And you have to, it's very complicated, but what we can glean from it in a short explanation is we need the green. And you're going to see that some of those numbers there are higher and some are lower, and it doesn't quite all make sense, but we know that there's a goal that we have to get to, and that's in that next column over. And you can see in ELA, 3 out of our 8 subgroups met that, and 2 other ones were within 1 point of that. And if we move to the next slide, we'll see it on math. On math, we made 7 out of the 8 categories. So what we really take from this slide is more, how does this help us make instructional decisions? What do we do with this? What do we need to be aware of? How do we need to serve better? How do we need to enrich better, remediate, support? It's information that helps us help our students in a very complicated package. All right, we can go to the next one. So thanks to Kevin and Sarah, they did a lot of the heavy lifting on explaining MAP. MAP is done 3 times a year. We do at LES, we do give our MAP test within the first couple weeks of school. So this is really that raw data. Kids are coming right off summer break and they take these tests. So this gives us some really good baseline data information. And what you can see there is, well, I can't see it under there, but I'll look on here. Our mean RIT remains high, and our school achievement percentile also remains very high. This first one is 3rd grade reading and 3rd grade math. If you want to look at the second one as well, 4th grade reading and math. This, I think, reinforces the notion that as kids move through Loveland and they stay in Loveland and they have the benefit of our excellent curriculum and our excellent teachers, that they really are high achievers. And you can see that that's really reflected in these numbers here with MAP. We use MAP just like Sarah and Kevin mentioned. We use it to form instructional groups. We use it to help us understand what categories kids might need more support in or might need more enrichment. It helps us plan groups. It helps our teachers collaborate and develop strategies that they can use in their instruction. So it's really a great piece of data for us to have 3 times a year. So one more slide for me. And this slide is very similar to what Kevin and Sarah shared in AIMSweb. However, we stuck with MAP reading fluency. AIMSweb measures some different portions that we don't need to do when they get to 3rd and 4th grade. This is total oral reading fluency. Why do we need to know about oral reading fluency? Because research tells us that it impacts comprehension. So this is a small piece that, like Kevin said, that takes a temperature that really helps us overall with our reading health on our kids. So again, perfect cone is just like a perfect circle. Ours is a circle. We want that 80, 15, 5. And if you look here, you can see that our 3rd grade is already almost at that, and our 4th grade has surpassed that. So this is really encouraging to us to look at this data because, again, reflection of great teaching, great intervention, great support for our Loveland kiddos. So where do we go next with this? One thing that's really exciting that we're doing at LES right now is we're using ESSER funds, and we've created something called Tiger Tutoring. So after school, I have 6 staff members who are providing reading instruction to approximately 30 3rd graders twice a week after school for an hour. It's free for our students. We're using the ESSER funds. We've really honed in on some of our kiddos who needed some extra support to help them get back on track. But overall, I'm really, really proud to be a part of LES and a part of Loveland. And thank you for letting us share with you tonight. And I get to now introduce the principal at LIS, Julie Carter.
Well, thank you for having me tonight. Last year, and I do want to note that a lot of the data that I'll be sharing is data that I share very closely with a dear friend, Mr. Collier Garth, because this was a lot of achievement that was happening under his watch and my watch. So I miss him dearly. If you guys know me well, you know that. So going into last year, Garth and my goal for our staff, we went into our staff meeting saying to our teachers that we didn't know what was going to come of last year, but we definitely said that our goals were, and a lot different than what they usually were, to take care of students, take care of families, and take care of each other were our big goals. And believe it or not, we didn't even say anything about growth, but growth happened. As you get into our scores, you'll see that just caring about kids, doing great things for families, supporting people through very nervous, hectic, anxiety-ridden times really fared well for us at LIS. So the scores that I'm going to share with you are very reflective of lots of hard work, lots of flexibility with staff, schedule changes, mitigation, procedure changes, lots of Garth and I debating about how to approach different things and how to do this. But our scores in meeting 3 of our 5 indicators were something that on the first day of me being the head principal, being able to share with staff, was a great first staff meeting for me, because there was a lot to celebrate when you're able to meet 3 out of 5 indicators. And also knowing that, just like Jen said, I mean, we all want 80 and that's our goal, but at the same time, knowing what all the ups and downs that we had and knowing that our students were moving and meeting measures was a relief, but also just something that we were extremely proud of. I do want to note at the very bottom of that, those 7th grade math scores are reflective of our subject accelerated 6th graders. So we have some 6th graders who go next door to David's building and take math class. So those students are taking the 7th grade assessment and they all pass, which was not a surprise to me. So also I did want to mention that I found out that Jen got a nice email today. And then Garth forwarded me a really nice email today saying that we just found out that although they consider LIS a middle school, which I don't really consider it a middle school, but we also got an email saying from US News declaring that we were one of the best middle schools in Ohio, meaning that we scored in the top 30 in Ohio. So that was a very nice email today. That was a nice surprise. So our next slide is just, and you saw something similar from Jen, is just noting that although in some areas we didn't meet that 80%, you can also see that we are well above the state average. 5th grade math was impressive, being 32%, over what the state average was for that. So I won't go through all the numbers because obviously you can look at those, but just very proud that our students are achieving, they're growing, and obviously our teams are setting their sights at being 80 across the board. But also knowing that we've lost some instructional hours. We have some things to make up. And I do feel like with some consistency this year, we're going to be able to meet that mark. Gap closing. So Jen talked about and explained kind of what gap closing is for our ELA. I do have to say and compliment LES because over the years, this is my 5th year here, we do get students that are receiving a lot of intervention in 3rd and 4th grade coming up to us. So we are getting students who are achieving well, and we're trying to really pick up where they left off. We use a lot of the same reading interventions that they use at LES. So we can basically take the level that they left it off at 4th grade and hit the ground running in 5th and 6th grade with similar interventions. So our measures of meeting 7 out of 8 here for ELA and gap closing are pretty impressive. And like Jen said, it is challenging to meet these marks based upon the goals that are set by the state. But in ELA, I think we met those, and the only one, and we were so close in a category that means a lot to me in that students with disabilities category. In math, again, our gap closing, we did not meet. We only met 4 of the 8 in math, which is reflective also of our math scores being a little bit lower overall. So I don't feel like it's just some inequities in subgroups. It is kind of reflective of our overall data. But I do want to kind of point out that we are very focused on how we support students in general, the individual. So like we talked about with just numbers, when I start looking at subgroups like economically disadvantaged, I really start to think about what do we do to engage those families in education. And I think that is such a priority for me as a leader, is making sure that we are encouraging those families, we're engaging with them. We have programs like we have a Starfish mentoring program where teachers can recommend students to have a mentor within our school. So really trying to make sure that we're supporting families and we're encouraging them to communicate with us. We do see, and I think you'll see this across the board in some gap closing, is some of the challenges of some of our subgroups is also them coming to school. So our economically disadvantaged subgroup is also the one that has the highest rate of absenteeism and things like that. So trying to work through processes like our attendance intervention meetings and not going in giving people a hard time, but going in having conversations about how can we help you to get your kid to school? What can we do positive to reward kids? Mrs. Carter is known for, I'll buy you lunch if you're here 5 days in a row, those types of things. So just trying to bring people in and trying to support them. Because also that we also have some students mobility wise that are moving districts, so they don't get the LES intervention before they come to LIS, so how do we kind of try to really wrap those students up and provide a lot of supports to them so we can see their achievement go up. So this is our map, and you've heard a lot about map. I just wanted to you can look at the numbers, but just focus on how we at LIS use map data. So we have data meetings throughout the school year, and that's when teachers, and we've had to manipulate our plans for that because we don't have enough subs to cover classrooms. So we use professional development days, and we use time to where teachers are documenting and we're having conversations whenever we can find time. But we definitely are looking at that map data and making sure that we're having quality conversations about kids. And then we're using, and you'll hear from David too, because we're on the same schedule, that we trying to use our Tiger time, which is basically a differentiated type of block at the beginning of the day, to try to support kids as much as we possibly can. So running groups like counseling groups, running executive functioning groups, intervention groups, reteaching concepts, those types of things. So we're definitely trying to look at those students that are struggling and providing additional intervention. I also wanted to mention too, is that a lot of our teachers are using this data to then guide their instruction within the classroom. So MAP came out recently with a nice report that has all the students on it, so they don't have to flick through all the students. And they can really look at where are the categories that they're struggling on. And it really helps with a quick snapshot of their group of students and being able to provide small group. I feel like our intervention specialists and general education teachers do a great job with co-teaching and really trying to make some stations and centers and getting students in small groups and provided targeting instruction. So that's a lot of how we use that map data within the classroom. Oh, and now I get to introduce my partner in crime on this campus, who I have to say, David is wonderful to work with because we have to share a lot of things. And he is just a wonderful person to work with. So I give you David Knapp.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. I'm still waiting on my lunch for being here 5 days in a row, by the way. Good evening, everybody. My name is David Knapp. Hello to the community at home watching. Proud principal of Loveland Middle School. Thank you. As we've heard tonight, despite the obvious challenges that the pandemic has provided us all, we have a lot to celebrate as a school and as a district with our students and our amazing staff. Obviously, I think, one of the key themes throughout this has been that idea of resilience and perseverance, and what we've learned throughout this about school, about the way our students learn best, and about how we can support each other during this time has really been really cool to be a part of. And, the data that we're looking at tonight obviously is important. It's important from a big picture perspective. It's important from a day-to-day perspective as we think about where our students are at. But ultimately, there are so many wins that don't show up in the data, right? Those wins that we celebrate in the classroom in our schools on a day-to-day basis. And you know, those things are happening every day. Just wouldn't want to miss the opportunity to give kudos and to thanks to our amazing teachers and our staff for all the work they do in, you know, day in and day out for our students. That the school day may end, but the work of our staff does not when that bell rings. And our challenges this year are bigger and more diverse than they ever have been before. So just really want to give thanks and kudos to all of our Loveland Tiger staff. You know, at LMS, our mission is every Tiger every day. And you know, where the data comes in play for us is when we think about reaching every single one of our, you know, 600 plus students on a daily basis. That data helps to paint a picture of where our kids are at. And you know, I'm excited to talk a little bit about that data tonight, as well as some of the great work happening across our schools, across our school. All right, so looking at our state report card data, before we dig into the numbers, I want to talk about the tests that you're going to see on here just a little bit, just because it's a little different than what we've seen at LES and LIS, as Mrs. Thorne and Mrs. Carter discussed. You are going to start to see at the middle school level that we start to have a little bit more of a pathway approach with different levels within our content areas. So for instance, you're going to see in 8th grade, you're going to see that we have an English language arts 8th grade, math 8, as well as a science 8. You're also then going to see high school tests showing up on here. And that's because we do have 8th grade students taking those high school credit classes. And you're actually going to see that if you look at our number of students taking those tests, what's important to note is that for our 8th grade math, you're going to see 166 students, for Algebra 1, 186. So about 50% of our students are taking that accelerated work with Algebra 1 as 8th graders, which is pretty cool. You're also going to see here that we do offer a section of honors geometry, with a small number of our students also take. So just like everybody else, 80% is the magic number. That's that target proficiency number that we're looking for to meet our indicator. And what you're going to see for LMS is that we reached that 80% mark in 2 of our 6 tested subjects, where we met that for Science 8 and for our Algebra 1 indicators. And while we did meet proficiency, as Mrs. Carter said, with her advanced kiddos, with our geometry kids, we saw 100% passage there. It's technically not counted, as that's the count of students is not high enough for that, but a success nonetheless. The areas that we did not meet the 80% mark are the 7th and 8th grade ELA and 7th and 8th grade math classes, that we have some opportunities for learning there. And while I do obviously want to, just like Mrs. Thorne and Mrs. Carter and Mr. Fancher and Mrs. Gehring alluded to, our goal obviously is for every single one of our students to pass that test and to reach that 80% mark as well. That's our goal. I do want to draw some context though with the middle school numbers, and looking at these tested areas. I've also drawn some comparisons between our like schools within the ECC, which I'm going to talk about as well. So when you think about our passage rate compared to other schools, other middle schools at that level, I want to talk about that too, because we are either at the top of that or on pace with most schools in those tested areas. One last thing I'll note in this area before moving on to is that the U.S. News report that Mrs. Carter and Mrs. Thorne spoke to, Loveland Middle School also got that too. So we're excited and proud for that as well. All right, looking at our 7th grade indicator specifically. Thank you, Andrea. Yeah, you're fine. You're going to see for our 7th grade ELA and 7th grade math, you can look at the state averages, you can see where LMS came in, and you can see our comparison to the state average. And just like you've heard from other principals, LMS is achieving at greatly beyond the state average. And what I want to point out about this slide is you're going to see, take a look at that math state average at 44%. That's a pretty significant difference in regards to that percentage of students being at proficient across the board. So when you think about where we're at with 68%, you know, we are still 24 percentage points above the average, which obviously is a little bit more significant there by way of where it falls kind of in comparison. When we think about our ECC comparison that I alluded to, I do want to note that for our 7th grade ELA, Loveland Middle School ranked 3rd out of the 8 ECC schools. And for 7th grade math, we were 1st out of 8 for the EC schools in comparison of those middle schools. I also want to reference the data that Mrs. Connor alluded to at the beginning of the presentation in regards to the U.S. Department of Education findings around our students who are behind expectations, and that really hitting the hardest at that late elementary and middle grades. And while we're not drawing any sort of excuse around some of these numbers, it is important context in regards to where we're seeing those opportunities for learning being the greatest. 8 to 11 weeks behind expectations in math and 6 to 10 weeks behind in reading. So I think that does tell a little bit of the context of the numbers as well. Switching over to 8th grade, you're going to see, so again, we have more course offerings here, and we're also testing in science in 8th grade. Again, you're going to see that where our areas of passage as well as our areas for growth are there. Looking at our numbers, so you're going to see that, within our Algebra 1, within our Science 8, reaching that 80%, 8th grade ELA and 8th grade math being below that at those percentages. Again, comparison to state average, well above. And again, I want to note the 8th grade math average percentage of 42%. So again, a very low number in those regards. Additionally, referencing the fact that, as I said earlier, we have about half of our 8th grade students in 8th grade math, the other half in Algebra 1, and a very small number of students in that geometry section. So, as we think about our OST data, our teachers and across our departments that have state testing data, science, math, and ELA, we've spent a lot of time digging into the data, looking at the item analysis, the standards, seeing how our students are performing and aligned to those standards, and really using that data to then drive how we are approaching our units and our instruction this year. We're looking forward to value-added data that should be coming out as well as one more kind of layer to how we're better understanding where our kids are at. Thinking about our gap closing, and just a reminder, the gap closing is looking at specific subgroups of our student population. What you're going to see for our ELA, this is focusing on ELA, is passage meeting the indicators in about half of the areas. With areas for grow, I'm going to focus on the economically disadvantaged, English language learners, and students with disabilities subgroups here. And, again, this data is very important because it really tells us specifically where are those areas of students that we really need to be focusing on, right? Like as we're thinking about our students as a whole, this really helps us to kind of better understand those populations of students that we want to be working with closely. So thinking about our ELA pieces and kind of what we're doing to help bridge the gap across all of these areas is some work we're proud of. Our ELA team is in the process of developing and implementing common assessments within our 7th and 8th grade programs that we're going to use to really better understand, especially as it relates to our subgroups of students, where students are at as it relates to specific standards. Where are they at in terms of that learning continuum? This will help drive small groups in our classroom, intervention strategies, and how we're really going to make sure to follow up with those students to make sure that we identify those gaps. We also have a very big focus on our writing instruction this year within our department, working collaboratively across the department and looking at our intentional approach to writing and how it is supporting the academic standards and growth needed as it relates to our Ohio State testing. Switching up to math, you're going to see similar data in regards to our math gap closing with half of those indicators being met. Again, looking at our economically disadvantaged and students with disabilities as a couple of those opportunities for growth. And, as I reference that idea of like every tiger, every day, what we're really thinking about is just an intentional approach and use of our data. We get lots of data as educators, as you can see, right? And this is just a fraction of that data that we're working with. Being intentional in our approach about the data that we're using to really better understand kind of where our kids are at. And that's really our goals at our departments, is to choose those data points that mean the most to us to identify those needs for students. One of the things that we're really proud of at LMS in regards to our approach with professional development and the ongoing learning that our staff is doing, when you think about these subgroups, a lot of these students we're going to see these students showing up in our intervention bells, especially as it relates to certain categories on here. And when we think about our intervention bells at LMS, we have that in ELA and in math, and those are co-taught. And we're doing some work right now thinking about that co-teaching process and really how to utilize best practice and what research says to really meet the gains that we're hoping to achieve with our students. So a lot of great work happening in the departments to address those data points. Map data, I'm not going to spend as much time talking about. What you're going to see, as we've talked through this a little bit, you're going to see kind of a health check with our map data. This occurs 3 times a year for 7th grade, twice for 8th grade, and we're using this as benchmark data to monitor student growth. You're going to see normal trends as it relates to our map data, the same type of trends that we've seen at other schools. We're well above normal RIT in terms of our school achievement percentiles within both of our 7th and 8th grade. Our teachers are, as Mrs. Carter had referenced, really digging into some of those new opportunities within the map reporting process to better utilize the reports, to better understand where our students are at in their learning progressions and continuum, to really kind of drive home that instruction. So in summary, we continue to strive to meet and exceed those indicators in all that we do. But we are very proud of the work that we have achieved and with our students and staff on a daily basis. Thank you for letting me share some of the great things happening at LMS. And we're going to welcome the new kid on the block, Mr. Adam Reed, to talk about the high school.
Good evening to everybody. It is great to be here. As Mr. Knapp said, I'm Adam Reed, the new principal at the high school. And so obviously we have hit the ground running here. Very excited for this school year. Being at the high school, obviously, the great part about is all the work that I get to inherit. The background that our students come into the high school with, they're ready to learn. They know how to get it done in the classroom. So it's great to be part of the team. So thanks for having me with that. My presentation really begins with our students because it has been so great to have students back into the building and at games, and you can see the pictures here. Last year we had over 200 students who never entered into the high school. And so as we talk about learning and we talk about teaching and we talk about test scores, it was challenging. It is challenging this year for students to adjust to getting up and not learning from their couch. And so we're very happy to be back and have our students involved, and you can see the smiles on our faces. We had a great homecoming week. It was such a blast, the students dressing up, but to have them in our classrooms in the safest possible way, taking all the precautions we can, really has made for a great start to the year. With that, we dive into our report card data. Like everyone else, we have taken a great deal of time to see where we are and how we're doing. I think what jumps off the page for me is just looking at what our Loveland High School students have done and how they continue to shine way above the state averages. Again, a testament to all the work that you've heard here tonight. Obviously, as we break these down and we look at it, the one thing that does jump off the page, of course, is our math scores. But this is not unusual across the state of Ohio. Across the board, math continues, or this past year has continued to be the one subject area where a lot of students have struggled and where a lot of our work begins. And that gets into our map, looking at our math gap closing and what we're focused on here. And as Mrs. Connor alluded to, our work is happening right now. We're diving right into it to try to figure out how do we close the gap with our math scores. We have been working very closely with our math department at the high school, utilizing the Restart Readiness tools to provide different assessments to get us some data points to see how we can continue to improve our instruction, meet the needs of our students, like some of the other buildings using ESSER funds for tutoring before school, after school, really focusing on the end of course exam to try to get as much prep as possible and close that gap. We also have students who may not be able to stay after school or come before school. We're providing materials to those students who may have a study hall to try to, again, give them an opportunity just to hit some of those skills refreshers to make sure that they are ready to go here in the spring. We also have Math Lab at the high school where we continue to provide additional support to students who struggle in the area of math. So we feel like we have a really good plan to attack this and really continue to help grow our scores into next year. The next subject is looking at our English language arts. And again, our students scored well above the state averages, which is, just an incredible. Where we look at this, you see a lot of green on our chart, which is where we want to be. We just missed our economic disadvantaged students just by a small percent, but that's something that, our counseling team with our teachers are looking into to try to figure out, how do we get them not only just over the hump, but how do we help them excel? And so that work continues, and a lot of the same. We have our enrichment bells for our English language arts classes to help support those students. And we're going to continue to identify those students who may need that little bit of extra prep going into the spring EOCs. So lots of work happening in those areas. The next one here are the state indicators that you can see in front of you. Again, such an achievement for the high school to be so far ahead of the state averages that you see. And although the scores are a little bit less from 2019, we're still right there. And again, we've talked about COVID quite a bit and just all the detriment that has had to learning. One of the great things we did just the other day was brought the ninth graders in on Wednesday for a presentation, and it was really staggering to say your last normal year was sixth grade. So it's quite remarkable what our past students and our current students have been able to do with those state indicators. Up next is talking about prepared for success, and looking at this is looking at the data. What goes into this are students who earn an honors diploma, students who earn an AP score of 3 or higher, and students who take those CCP courses. Our focus, into this year is to continue to help, drive our students to find their interests and passions, whether it's through the courses we offer at our high school, the CCP courses we offer at our high school, or those courses outside. As well as to really challenge our students to stretch themselves in those high AP level courses that might be a little intimidating at times. But our goal, of course, at the end of all of this is, to prepare our students for success and to make sure that when they are ready to take that next step after high school, as they take the college course, take their college entrance exams, that they are remediation free and they're ready to go. And we feel very confident that we're meeting that. And at the end of the day, we want our students to take the most rigorous course load that they can to help them be prepared. And obviously the CCP part helps them earn some college credit, which is also a really great thing. So working through that and continue to help that number grow year in and year out. The ACT scores obviously are a huge measure for our high school students. And what you can see from our data here is that even throughout the pandemic, our students continue to maintain a score higher than the state average. And I feel like that's really, the great highlight of what the high school, our teachers and students have been able to do. One of the things about ACT scores, which is really interesting, and somewhat not fair at all at the same time, at Loveland, we have every high school student take the ACT test or take the ACT, where some other schools may not do that. So our school is this score is a reflection of all our students. Kind of along those same lines is also the AP. Any student who takes an AP course at Loveland High School takes the AP test. And that is different from some other high schools around us who handpick and make sure that those students will earn a 4 or 5 score and not necessarily give every student that opportunity. So again, to see where we are with our scores is absolutely, it is incredible. The one thing I'll talk first about here is just the number of students taking AP courses. As you can see, there was that dip in the 2020-2021 school year. A lot of that has to do with just a fear of what the learning environment was going to be. The challenge of taking an AP course, perhaps for the first time through a computer screen, that's a pretty big challenge. And so then immediately you can see how that number then has jumped back up. And even this year, we're well above 400 students taking AP courses again at the high school. So a lot of that is our students ready to challenge themselves. And it's also our teachers who are really creating that, caring learning environment and a welcoming to say, come and take this challenge. It will be rigorous, but yet, an encouraging one that they can get that taken care of. So a really great opportunity for our students and all their AP. New courses, first, that's a thank you to you as a board for being willing to allow our teachers and students to continue to create their own path, see all the different, subject areas out there, how history can change and math changes and just the needs that our society presents. So thank you for that. As you can see, these are the courses that you all were able to approve for us last spring. And to see the enrollment numbers that, they were popular courses and lots of students wanting to take them. And our work actually continues right now. We're changing the way we do new course proposals. We're actually going to begin that process. Well, we started today with having our teachers bring that to you by the December board meeting, because we want students to be able to see what courses may be new for the 22-23 school year. So very excited for that opportunity. But, really, when you look at this, we continue to say, student choice is even more important. Our teachers being, up in their profession and knowing what our students need. So that collaboration to create new courses, really exciting. And it's always great to see what new ideas come from our students. Honors graduates, obviously, a huge piece that we look at here is trying to, make sure that, our students, again, are having a great experience at Loveland High School, that they're taking rigorous courses, they're challenging themselves. And this data really is to go to show that over the last 2 years, the expanded options that our students have to earn an honors diploma. And obviously, when you look at the preparedness for success measure, this is one of the categories that our students. So this goes to the AP courses and our CCP courses as well. Our CCP numbers, students taking college level courses. We have 292 students who are taking these courses on our campus. They are not going off campus. They are actually taking them, being taught by Loveland High School teachers, which is quite remarkable that we have that many staff members who are credentialed and able to do that. And really to have these types of courses, really, again, it expands their opportunities, it expands their knowledge, it lets them stretch themselves, jump into some topic areas that just aren't the 4 cores, even in the cores, to really make them go to the next level with those. And so students taking these courses are really important because it does continue to increase our prepared for success measure. And it's really, again, it's a testament to our staff members who can teach these courses. It really helps our students earn that college credit to really get them a leg up in what they're doing. We have students also taking courses off campus. There's only 32 of those students, but when you look at the types of courses that they're wanting to take, it is remarkable. And I would guess a lot of opportunities that all of us in this room and maybe on the screen never would have thought that course was possible to do. So the last one here is our college and our career focus. And having been only on the job since, August 1, a lot of the work has been talked about. What do we do for our students afterwards? They get a great experience here at Loveland, and what is the next step, and are they ready? And so the work of our career and college counselor, Drews Mitchell, has been ongoing for many, many years. I've just become a part of it. But as you can see, it's really looking at how do we provide opportunities, not only inside our classrooms, but now outside of the classroom, off campus, with some pre-apprenticeships, looking at our Bell schedule for next year. How do we give students who might be so busy after school hours, how do they get involved so they can experience internships and what we can do differently. So lots of great works at the high school. And I will turn it over to Mrs. Connor now to talk a little bit more about college and career focus.
Yeah, so as we get ready to wrap up this evening, I do want to point out that Drews Mitchell, our career and college counselor, we plan for him to be present at our November board business meeting, because he has some we've teased some of it out here on the screen on this particular slide, but I think it would be really powerful for all of you to get to hear what type of work we've been able to relaunch. We started some work with Mr. Mitchell prior to COVID, and then we had the COVID year where we paused, and then this year we've been able to relaunch some things that are really, really exciting for our students for graduation purposes, but also for that career component. So I guess the best way to wrap this up is I think that all of you probably now know why it's so wonderful to work with the professionals that you just heard from. You've had a chance to hear from their own mouths and about their passion for making sure that we are taking care of all of the kids that are in their building. And I know that I asked you guys, and you guys have been wonderful. I see several of you taking notes. Some of you may have questions. Some of these, Cullen, I think we might want to make sure we leave the screen on and the mic, because some of the questions that the principals have may be for specific buildings or specific principals. And I just want the principals to feel comfortable, if it's okay with the board, for them to step up and answer some of those. And that might be the best way to kind of handle this moving forward. So at this point, I'm ready to ask if there's anybody that has any questions.
I'm going to start because I'm afraid that Mr. Doherty has so many Post-it notes over there. I'm just not sure we're going to get to leave tonight. So I just have two things to say, and one is not a question. The presentation this evening to me was extremely complete, very well articulated, and showed us the data and really explained the data. And so I have a question. As you might have expected, I have a question about foreign languages. And so I would like to talk about that sometime in the future. I see that we don't have any CCP. I know how that changed, and I would just like to know how we're doing in foreign languages, because that wasn't a part of ELA and math and all those things. And I don't want anybody to think that I don't think the presentation was complete, because I think it was. But I'd like us to talk about foreign languages at some time in the future. And I just wanted to, every principal did a wonderful job, but the quote I wrote down was from the new guy. And I think it reflected what everybody was telling us tonight, which was that all of this data showed us good things, and where it showed us that there were some opportunities rather than slides, it showed, according to Mr. Reed, where our students have struggled and where our work begins. And I really think that's what everybody was saying. And I think that was just a great quote that he said. So I think that's what you all were saying. And he got to talk last and say it in a very articulate way. So I thought it was a really great presentation. And now let's see, should I let the person with the most Post-it notes go first?
Why don't,
or the fewest?
I was thinking that there's probably going to be questions for each of the principals. And instead of having Kevin ask his series of questions to all the principals and then making them roll through, why don't we try, if anybody has questions, kind of go by grade level or from the beginning towards the end?
Yeah, actually, mine are not about individual grade levels, and I have far fewer than it looks like.
Well, then go ahead.
Okay.
He just likes to make Post-it notes.
Well, then maybe we'll let Kevin go first, and maybe he'll catch some of the others, and then we'll, yeah.
So thank you. A lot to absorb there. Your commitment to our kids is quite obvious. And I think every parent in this district, if they're not all of them are listening tonight, I can tell you, but a lot more will in the coming days, I'm sure, are grateful to the commitment, the hard work that you do and the teachers in your buildings do every school day. So let me start with that. So my questions and comments are well intended. So put them with that kind of a backdrop. I try to just make sure that we're kind of looking at things like this as rigorously as possible. And that's really maybe part of the background. And I think last year when we did this, I said something about numbers being your friend, even if numbers don't always tell you what you want to hear. They help you understand what the world is, and that gives you, something to really focus on. So with that as a backdrop, I see us comparing ourselves to state standards really throughout everything. And when I was looking at the really detailed data on the spreadsheets that you can download prior to tonight, I started to look at us versus Region 13, and in some cases where I could, I tried to do us versus similar districts. That one's probably harder to get to. But it seems to me, given the broad diversity of performances across the state, a more rigorous standard might be within our region or within similar districts. So that's a general comment. I think that's a rougher set of comparisons. We won't look as good when we look at it that way, but it might be a fairer comparison for us to just step back and look at ourselves. Number two, it really struck me, and a number of the principals highlighted this, but the disparity between economically disadvantaged and students with disabilities. Sometimes we got pretty close to state standards and things like that. That was good. But the part that struck me was the difference between those two subgroups and everybody else. It was, I don't know, it was almost shocking to me. And it just, maybe it shouldn't be surprising, but what it leads me to ask, and I don't necessarily expect an answer to it tonight, but given that significant disparity, what are we going to do about that? Because these are the kids that seem to need the most help as we launch them out into the world. What more can we be doing to significantly close the gap between those students and others? Third thing was, I think it was the Kra assessment. And if I understood that one right, that's an assessment of how kids are prepared when we first see them. And I don't know if I should be taking this message from that data, but it hits me that we're right at the state standard. We're right there. But somehow over the course of time, a gap between where they started and where they become at different grade levels within Loveland grows significantly. They do really good. And it leaves me asking the question, what's happening there? Is that us? Is it our community? Because we widen this gap significantly versus the rest of the state. And it's maybe another introspective question. The final one is a legitimate question for you. And it's at the 90,000 foot level. Again, numbers being our friends, we know generally that this has been a rough period for our kids. Our kids haven't had nearly as rough a time as kids in other parts of the state and the country. We all know that, but they had some challenges. And what do we say to parents at maybe a high level about what we're going to do, how we're going to kind of make up for the challenges that the world threw at us in the last 2 years, I guess, almost now, right? So I'll leave it to whoever wants to answer that question. The others don't necessarily need an answer tonight, but they're more for reflection.
So I can speak, Mr. Doherty. That work has already started. What I would say to the parents, that work started as soon as this data that we reported on tonight came out in June. So this administrative team, when Mr. Broadwater came on board, had already started a lot of this work, making plans, adjusting plans. So that rhythm and flow of the school improvement work that, I kind of took you guys back to that reflection that we did last year, that is continual and that is always going on. That's just the ebb and flow of the work of the school system. So this team met this summer, already talked about that. You heard principals mention it. You heard Ms. Carter reference specifically some things that they've already started doing at LIS to start, taking care of that gap, that it is definitely an acknowledgement that we made over the summer. It also aligns exactly with the educational research, and we know those subgroup disparities everywhere are a challenge, but that does not mean that we stop caring and that we stop working on that. That is not the case at all with this team. I can assure you that every conversation we have, every time we talk with the these professionals behind me, it is about how we're meeting those kids. And sometimes those are challenging conversations. Sometimes that's me coming to the principal saying, have you thought about this? And they're like, well, I'm working on this, but okay, Andrea, you're asking me that question again. And so we continually have that in our forefront. These people behind me, I would put them up against anyone in terms of how we're really thinking about this strategically. You heard reference to the use of ESSER funds for after school. So, we are going to continue to refine that practice. We're going to continue to get better at how we use those funds to continue to mitigate the impact of that learning loss. So it is a continual process. It's not finished. I don't know. We do know that it's going to take several years to get everybody back up to where we were, but I am confident with the growth that we've seen with our students already. We're making amazing gains with this group. I know that's a very high level answer, maybe to your high level question. And I don't know a better way other than to say, we work really hard at this, and this is what we talk about pretty much every day when I see them.
I like that you raised your hand, Mr. Collier, like we're in school.
Call on me. Call on me. No, one of the things that you mentioned, Mr. Doherty, it may have been one of the very first points that you made that you weren't expecting an answer for. But something that I do want to make sure to bring up is that you mentioned comparing ourselves not just to the state, but maybe in our region. And Mrs. Connor, if you could go back to the performance index slide, that's something I would like to point out are the schools that are on this list are the Region 13 schools. So these are the schools in our area. And the performance index is a measure that takes all of the state tests that our entire district, state data wise, and all of our students that take them, and the performance index on how we stack up against those other schools in Region 13. And when you look through this list of where we're at, where the schools that are performing better than us are Marymount, Madeira, Indian Hill, Wyoming, and schools that we are performing better than being Springboro, Sycamore, Kings, Milford, Mason. I think that does give you not a total picture, but a glimpse of that we are kind of holding our own when it comes to performance in our region.
Garth, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's in fact where this question or this comment started. And it was when I was looking at reading scores, trying to make sure that I was seeing it, fairly. And I couldn't get it to look any better. And it just told me it is what it is. Okay, so, numbers are your friends. It's telling you have a problem. We'll figure out what to do about it, right? We're professionals, and that's how we should approach it. But it was one of the pitfalls of, well, let me say that differently. It's not a pitfall. There's two sides to this coin. If you look at this slide, we do great. We really do great on this one. With everything we've been through, we should be, kids did fine on this one. Looks like we really did a great job with them. But if you start to tear down to some of the specific categories, it gets overshadowed by the overall. And that's why, at a more granular level, I think it's worth taking a look there. I mean, on some of these, I said, well, most everybody didn't do so well, but a few did. What did they do that allowed them to? I mean, it's just an opportunity to generate a question, to maybe generate some research, make some phone calls, and et cetera. So we're on the same page. So good with that.
I'll jump in just with a couple comments tied into what Garth had just said. It's going to tie into what I'm going to do in my superintendent's update when you start looking at expenditures per pupil and performance, and they actually call it the ROI, or the return of investment, and that's what it is. What are you what are you getting in terms of expenditures? But the other part, kind of coming in from a different perspective, you asked about the KRA and the growth. And it's one thing I notice when I look at our data, we grow. We do a very good job as we go through there. The perspective I will give you is I have been in districts, and there are many districts that have multiple elementaries that are K through 6. So you have a 5th grade at 4 or 5 different buildings. the beauty that we have here at Loveland, and I would say it goes to the Board of Education and who set up these grade band schools. In my opinion, it's not only set up best fiscally, it's also set up so that we have all of our fifth grade teachers in the same building, all of our fifth grade intervention specialists in the same building, all of our paraprofessionals. Therefore, you have all the students in there. If I were to ask the fifth grade principal, Julie Carter, how is Johnny Smith doing? Chances are she probably knows Johnny Smith. And so the data that you see here is the high level data. The work that gets done is the work that I just mentioned, which is Jen Foran knows this student, we need to go here. I've seen Kevin Fancher, he's a magician at knowing what they need in terms of interventions. And the way we are set up, I think, allows for that growth, but utilizing it in the way that these administrators do, I think is fantastic. And we'll always look at how can we improve. You're always going to do that. Otherwise, why test?
Right.
You need to look at it and see how you can improve. And the process that Andrea has set up with the school improvement, we're going to look at it and we want to look at it. But the granular level is where the work gets done, and our staff and our administrators, they get pretty passionate about it. I know that.
Right. I know that I came in here, I probably did have 15 questions that I reduced to 4. But just maybe a suggestion for you to think about for the benefit of parents and families, maybe some communication to them that helps explain what we're seeing and what our plans are. I mean, it's too much detail, I think, for in here. But the parents of kids in particular buildings, maybe the building strategy is something that parents would appreciate hearing about. I have every confidence that you folks have this. I mean, there's no question in my mind. You know what you're doing. You're going to take care of everything. But maybe communicating that to the community would be helpful.
Yeah, it's a good point. I talked with Andrew Setters, our communications consultant. What our next large communication is going to be is what's called the quality profile, which you've probably seen. So it's going to, at a high level, explain, we want everybody to know the U.S. News and World Report. We're here, we're doing well. But then also from a little smaller level out of the building, what do we want to report and how do we want to do that, I think is what you're saying, in order to really dig into what that means. But yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Not too bad, right? Not too bad. No, you did all right. Other questions? Who's up next?
I can go anytime.
No? Okay. All right, Eileen.
There we go. All right. Sorry. Should I say all of that again? So what I was saying while I was muted was that I appreciated the presentation is very thorough. But like Mr. Doherty, I'm not looking for any answers tonight. A lot of what I'm going to say are just comments and things to think about, and observations, and all of it is stuff that you already know about the subgroups and the concerns with the closing the gaps, especially for economically disadvantaged students. What I would like to say is that I really appreciated what Julie said from LIS about how do we engage those families in education, because that's what I was thinking throughout, as everybody is, but it was just nice to hear it verbalized that that's obviously on the forefront of everyone's mind. How do we support those families? And then the attendance issues aren't a, we got you, you're in trouble. It's what can we do to help and support? I'd love to talk more about that. I feel like I have some ideas there, not tonight, but just in the future. But obviously those are the biggest struggles in regards to that subgroup that every district seems to have. Other questions that I'm not looking for answers for right now, but What about the kids that can't attend after school tutoring? I know somebody, I'm sorry, I don't recall which building, said that there's materials printed to supplement, but if those kids are already struggling and aren't loving school, they probably need a little more than just printed materials. And I'm not saying that's the only thing that's done, but what more can we do for them? And I would be interested to hear more in the future about the intervention bells that are co-taught. And I had two more things. What were they? Sorry. Oh, at LHS with the math and ELA labs that you have for enrichment. I was just curious on data that exists to show if those labs are as effective as we need them to be. So are those students succeeding then in their math and ELA classes as a result of those labs? And the last question, I promise. At LMS, you guys talked about planning to use a common assessment to gather more data to create small groups. Just out of curiosity, why use a common assessment and test the kids more and not work off of the map data and teacher observations? So thanks for the presentation.
So I just want to be sure that you're throwing out some reflections and thinking that there might be more information coming to the board.
At another
point.
later time. I don't expect you to know all of that right now.
Okay,
Oh,
thanks.
and then, I guess the last thing I lied would be the allocation of ESSER funds and then what remains, and just to look at different options, because I want to know what more we can do to support you guys in closing those gaps.
Okay, thanks. Michelle, did you have anything?
No.
No? All right.
Well, I'd be happy to follow both of those because it makes my job much easier. The Eileen and Kevin reflected perfectly the overwhelming fact that you guys are doing an incredible job with this. It was really great to hear the depth of knowledge that you guys have that we don't, and how you've shared it with the children. And it's really one of the few times that I'm like, wow, I'm way over my head in this job. There's a lot of things that I don't understand that you guys do. So I really appreciate that. Andrea, I want to kind of just throw to you. You had kind of spoken in the beginning about the opportunities that COVID has given us. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody heard the things that we did even last year to kind of mitigate the damages that we saw coming, as far as getting children back in the classroom, about having our teachers ridiculously stretch themselves by using in-person and video technology at the same time. Can you speak to that just a little bit, like what we did, not just reactively now that we have this data, but proactively to minimize the damage?
Mm-hmm. So, wow, I refer to things as BC, before COVID, and things, as I'm putting this frame of reference in my mind. But, we learned a lot last year about how to reach kids, and there are some practices that we still use. Like I was in a meeting at the high school yesterday, and the counselors were talking about using some digital platforms still to meet some parents who couldn't come in and meet on a student. So just from that piece, it used to be all of our parent teacher conferences were in person. Everything we did was in person. So we have, I believe, learned a little bit about how to be a little bit more flexible in that piece. So that's just the communication piece. As far as our learners and our students, we started at the end of last year taking a look. So we gave some of those restart readiness assessments, and we started digging into that. So we knew there were going to be some holes and some gaps in this state data. And so we were prepping for that. And then part of the work that we did this summer is dig into the data, create the plans. So the stuff that you're hearing them talk about with the map data is work they've already started. So, you know, they've already taken that data and grouped students. They already knew which students from their state, from the state assessment that we just went through means X number of kids. You've heard teachers talk about item analysis. You know, our teachers are digging into the item analysis and they realize, wow, certain math concepts we discovered, you know, during that shutdown in the spring of 2020, a whole group of kids missed that entire concept. So when school started, you know, we brought kids back and we started teaching, thinking and assuming some of those things were there, needing to realize we need to stop and take a moment and go back and pick those skills up. You know, part of what, you know, Eileen was asking that question about common assessments, and I certainly don't want to speak for Mr. Knapp, but I know that the common assessments are going to give us a little bit more specific data versus the map is, you know, you test that 3 times a year. So even in those restart readiness assessments, we have groups of staff who are giving what are called checkpoints. So they have the broader benchmark assessments and they have these little tiny checkpoints that are like 10 question, basically quizzes just to check to see if the kids know those standards, because we do have to be, you know, very specific in how we're approaching this. I do believe, you know, talking with Mr. Giuffre, there are some conversations we've had a little bit about ESSER. So I anticipate that we'll be able to give some of that information on what we've spent ESSER on, and then also to be able to say this is what we continue to refine. And so right now our principals are refining their plans. You again heard them say we're doing before and after school tutoring. We're using the thing with ESSER though, ESSER the learning recovery has to be done outside of the typical school day. The learning portion of that 20% of that cannot be used within the school day. So it has to be something that is considered extended beyond the school day, right? And so that's why it can be used for the summer learning. That's why it can be used for a lot of the after school or before school outside of your school hours portion. So there are constraints to that portion of it. So we have to make sure that anything that we're doing falls within that realm. But you heard after school tutoring, you heard, so what this team didn't talk about was their extensive work in their Tiger Times and how you can walk in through any of our buildings, pretty much, I believe, LPS and above, and you're going to see teachers and smaller groups with kids that have already through either map data or in-class data or some of these other data points that they're collecting, where they're saying, you know, we've got 5 kids here that need to work on this. We're going to group them together. We have 10 kids here that are working on this. This is a very, very specific and strategic approach. I think even Mr. Knapp referenced we need to be very intentional. He used that word. So this isn't, you know, we can go in and just teach and say it's up to the kids to learn. We have to be very purposeful about making sure that all of those subgroups are challenged and that we take a look at that. I do like to point out that sometimes people don't like to talk about gap closing, and we took the intentional effort to include that in this presentation on purpose because we wanted everybody to know no kid is forgotten. I don't care what subgroup or whatever they're categorized in. And this is very difficult for educators to talk about because I started the presentation by saying these are children behind the numbers. And so we don't even really like to take them and put them in subgroups. So that is a very hard conversation to have with educators because we want to love all kids. We don't want to say that a certain kid fits in a certain subgroup, right? But we do know there are challenges sometimes that we have to help those children and those families overcome. And I believe that this team is working hard on that. So there's a lot we can do. I'm more than happy. I know that any of these principals would be more than happy for any of our families to contact them and say, what are you doing about, you know, XYZ? And they can probably list far more detail than I can right now, just in the high level, telling them specifically what we're doing to kind of make that meet those marks. So I don't know, Eric, I hope that answered some of your questions.
That was a perfect answer. I think that the danger of somebody who who got the Cliff Notes version of this is like, well, they're reacting to these losses when I know that in fact you've been proactive all along. I want to
Yeah.
make sure that we had a chance to put that in Cliff's Note version.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
And this goes back to something that I think that both Kevin and Eileen stated, which is the AMO data in particular that breaks kids into subgroups, despite what we were just talking about, gives you the ability to very intentionally, as you said, pay attention to the groups of kids who have had the biggest challenges from this, and to focus our resources as much as we can on those children, obviously all children, but on those children that are having the hardest time. And I appreciate that you've identified them and realized that there are groups of children that are struggling more than others. I think Kevin and I think Eileen also just mentioned comparing us to state averages makes us look really good, and I like that. I'd like us to compare ourselves to peers who are better than us. You know, where are we falling behind and what can we do better? Having the high level data on group 13 was great. Is that possible to break down even through all of those other subgroups by grade? And would that help us? You know that answer much better than I do. So I'd kind of just leave it as a challenge to think about. I did have a question. It's the same question I had last year, and I didn't understand it last year either. And it was specifically slides 17 and 18 is where it first pops up. And I'd throw it to whoever feels like answering it. Can you explain the school achievement percentile and how we drop in school achievement percentile, realizing I think that we all understand that there's been some harm brought to the educational process through the disruption brought about by COVID, but also presuming that we should have done better than other schools, I would hope, or at least as well as other schools. So I don't understand how our school achievement percentile drops and what that number actually reflects.
I think the first person that hit that might have been Mr. Fancher's slide. I don't know. You won't take it, Garth? I saw you put your mic on. So go ahead.
It doesn't matter to me. I just know that.
Go ahead. You can go ahead. Sure.
I think something to point out with because we're talking about map data, Dr. Schwetzer now, and that this is nationally normed. So the school percentile rank doesn't get adjusted every year. It's for that set of norms. So our drop is not comparing ourselves this particular year with everybody who also has had a drop. It's comparing ourselves to the national norm. And that was pre-COVID. And you can see that if there was a drop, that is our drop compared to the national norm, not necessarily compared to each individual district or how our students are doing across with all the kids in the nation. It's a norm referenced assessment. Does that help?
No, that's perfect. That's a great explanation of it, because it didn't make a lot of sense to me as I was thinking of it as, why are we suddenly doing worse than other districts, which clearly we are not. And I don't think I had a whole lot of other comments other than the fact that one of the measures that we used was explained to me and doesn't make a lot of sense, which is looking at the K2 improving at-risk readers. This was slide, sorry, I think 12 of 50. Oh, you're already there. So we had 20, I'm looking at the kindergarten, we had 28 not on track, but then we only got a chance to measure 4 of those to give us a 50% improvement. I know that's because those children change schools and change buildings, so they fall off that. Is there a way for us to kind of capture that and make sure we're doing, at least that well, if not better over time? Meaning looking at those specific kids over 2 to 3 years to see if we get them caught up.
Yes. So 2 things, and Kevin Fancher and I've really spent a lot of time on this, so you can tag team this with me. So when a few years ago, if you want to go to the mic and we can tag team it together. So a few years ago, Kevin and I stumbled upon this mystery about how this measure is calculated. So Loveland receives a district measure for this, and which is different, which will feel different. So when you see that, that's going to be very, very different from what you see for the building. We also stumbled upon the fact that we were getting, it's not really a penalization, but it's a little bit of, here are the kids that are in kindergarten at LECC And then we were splitting up our first grades, and half of them were going to LPS and half were going to LECC. So the only ones that counted on this LECC measure were the kids that were at LECC in kindergarten, right? So then the measure started all over for LPS at Kevin's building for the kids from first grade to second grade. This literally took Kevin and I going, we can't figure this out. We're reading this technical manual. We're going to figure out why this is happening. The valuable part in this is a system we've created. So Loveland has always done a wonderful job meeting the needs of our readers. But what we struggled with a bit, and Kevin can back me up on this, is what about these particular kids? Are we being intentional with those particular kids? Once we figured it out and could target it, then we started working together. And Kevin, you can explain it better than me. So you want to talk about some of the things we've put in place and why we started watching this through a different lens.
So a couple things before we jump into that. One of the things that
Hold
happens.
on one second.
Am I muted again? Okay. One of the things that's important to note is when you talk about that subgroup of socioeconomically disadvantaged students, we have a lot of those housing facilities. So subsidized housing is in Hamilton County. And so when you split it that first grade by counties, and then you send those first grade students to LPS, there's a high percentage of them that get in that first grade group for LPS. So in that measure, it's very challenging for the LPS building. So it is helpful to have our first grade team back together and really streamline those interventions and services for all of our students. So that's just an important note to kind of be mindful of. The thing that we were, and Andrew is right, we've had some difficult conversations about this. The thing that we were not doing well pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, was we were allowing summer slide to happen. So summer slide is when you get all this tremendous growth and then you send them off in summer and then you have to retest them when they come back in September, and you have to have them not lose any ground, but actually make up ground. And so we really took a three-prong approach to that, and we implemented a summer jumpstart program, which in the midst of the pandemic, we had to put a stop to. So we were making tremendous strides in that area, and then we had to hit the brakes, stop some things, and then get restarted. The other thing that we implemented and jumped into, thanks to really the board's support in that through the Office of Teaching and Learning, is we started the summer book exchange program. We targeted specific kids, and we really put in incentive to keep them reading over the summer. And we told parents, we're not after you to grow them over the summer. We're just after you to keep them where we left them. So when we send them off to you in the summer, we just want them to keep practicing and building those literacy skills. So that was the second prong. The third thing that we did after the summer jumpstart program and the summer book exchange is we really looked at what we were doing as a building during the first couple of weeks of school. And so that literacy, the K-2 portion of it, we really didn't worry about it previously until it started really showing up negatively on that report card. We were very much focused on, let's get those assessments out of the way and start serving kids. And what we realized, we started that Ames Web assessment on day 2. And it really impacted us negatively on this measure because our kids on day 2 are still in summer mode. So what we looked at was incorporating a jump start within the school year. And so Eileen, as you were talking about, what about those kids who don't have the transportation or the means to do something after school, and they're not available to us? We looked at what could we do to help support those students. And so we did targeted intervention groups in the first couple of weeks of school just to rebuild those skills that students lost over the summer. That is a lot of work, honestly, to get 50% of those students who were considered to be not on track back on track. And Mr. Doherty, you had talked about, like, how do we look compared to other schools? And I'm not going to throw any other elementaries under the bus, but I did look at elementary schools, and I shared with Andrea. Most elementary schools that we play in the same sandbox, and some of them that we wish we could play in their same sandbox because of the resources they have in their districts, they're all in that 40 to 50% range. So we are on par with that. We know what the work is ahead of us. And then really when you start talking about like the research tells you that intervention is not this little quick fix. It's like everything else, it takes time. And so those 6 months that we have to grow them, then we measure them again after 3 months of summer. We really know that we need like a K2, continue to fill those holes, grow those kids, grow our subgroups. But the ultimate indicator is Mrs. Foreign's building. When you have 100% of our students who are not impacted negatively by the third grade reading guarantee, it says that those feeder schools are working really hard to give our kids the best shot at being successful readers. So there is a lot of work that goes into it. It is not where we want it to be. And quite honestly, like with the summer book exchange and the pandemic, one of the things that we did was we had to put all of our books that we purchased that were on a rotation, we put them not knowing what how the virus and things was going to communicate or transmit through surfaces back when we go back to the pandemic. So we took a lot of those out of circulation. So kids would take them for a week. We would take those books back and we would let them sit for a week. So we really reduced the number of students that we were targeting so that we could at least continue for our most needy students a summer book exchange program. This past summer, we ramped that back up again. And because through the Hamilton County Board of Health and CDC, they said that the surface wasn't the concern. It was more airborne, as you guys probably know. So we put more of those books back in circulation, but we're still not to the level of support that we were aiming for pre-pandemic, but we're getting there. And we're going to continue to work hard to kind of attack that through that three-prong approach. The summer jumpstart program, our summer book exchange, and then other supports within the school year.
I also want to point out, Mr. Fancher, that he doesn't really, once we figured it out, he won't let me off the hook. So we schedule marathon meetings periodically. And then, I get called in and then Sarah's there and representatives from LES, Jen and Jane are there. And we're sitting there going through every single kid. So we've really changed our approach, I feel, for the kids that you're seeing on this measure. We do good things here, but this measure we have to be very intentional on. And I think we've developed a system. He doesn't let me out of it. He'll remind me and say, no, we're not having that meeting. When is she available? We're doing it when she's available. And it's just become part of our practice. So we have worked on this. And although this feels interesting when you look at it, I assure you it's made huge gains in this one.
And the challenge continues to be, as Mrs. Carter pointed out, connecting with those families and really building the value of that. Because when I look at my summer jumpstart numbers, we invited 107 students to participate in that. We had 59. Now, when you look statistically, that's actually pretty high. We have 55% of our students participate in that program. I would love for 100% of our kids to participate in that program, but it's building those connections. It's helping support those families, and it's a lot of heavy lifting.
I appreciate you calling out Mrs. Foreign, because that was my impetus to say, I think we should look at this over 2 to 3 years. We can see it that. Long enough. The last thing that I wanted to call out, and it was because I'm always sensitive to numbers that I think don't reflect where we truly are and how those can be used out of context sometimes, kind of like with the Cincinnati Enquirer article, was from David Knapp's report on, and this is slide 37 out of 58. And it's the LMS state indicators for 8th grade. And one more. There you go. So the 8th grade math showed up at 59%. And to me, I read it as structurally impossible for us to do well at that mark because we have such high participation in algebra. And so to me, what it shows is you're taking the students that are performing higher and you're separating them into another group. Purposely, it's going to be very challenging to meet that. So I don't need an answer to it. I just I wanted to make sure that everybody realized that.
And that is a follow-up. If you look at the high school, Mr. Reed didn't mention this, but if you look at that high school Algebra 1, the students in 9th grade taking Algebra 1 are those 8th grade students. So it's that same group of students.
And they're doing significantly better by the next year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's that's one measure when you look at the state report cards and the state reporting here. Sometimes it's not apples to apples with that because districts are set up differently when it comes to the mathematics and the tiers that they do. But that's a very good point on your part.
Well, and again, I appreciate all your time and detail and taking care of these kids.
Those were great questions.
Dare I ask
I learned a
anything
lot.
else? We were estimating about an hour. I think, have kept the principals here about 2 hours, and I think Austin is about ready to, but we'll get there. I promise. We'll get there in a few minutes.
I did want to point out that we now know why Nicole is not here tonight.
No, we don't know, but that's all right. And it was good stuff. It was all about people like you. That's who we're talking about. So unless there's anything else for the school improvement update, we'll move to superintendent's update.
Okay, Austin, I'm gonna try and get through quick here. I do have a superintendent's report, and let's see if I can pull it up here. What I wanted to show is this was the most enjoyable presentation for me in terms of this is the work we do. This is why we're here, and seeing exactly how our principals, how our staff work with our kids, and what we do. Just with the short discussion Kevin had there, that's information I didn't know, and it's awesome to see what we do for kids, and that's why it's a blessing to be here. But I think part of what my role as a superintendent is to take all the work that we do and tie it into the other part of the I'll call it business, which is finances. Where do we get the money? How does it work? Mr. Jouffre, who is our interim treasurer, Rob and I have spent a lot of time together along with the finance committee, which is Kevin and Dr. Swetchenow, and just looking at how we can get more information out to the public. So I'm just going to give one quick example, and this looked a lot better when I had it on my screen. It's a little granular, but I did throw a chart up here. What this is, it's the per student spending and performance index score. This is from 2019. This is the latest data we have. I'm taking it off the Forecast 5, which again, the data source is going to be the Ohio Department of Education. And so when you look at this, this is Hamilton County. You have two axes here. The horizontal axis, 86.72, is the average performance index score for all Hamilton County districts. Okay, so 86.72. We don't want to be average. We don't want to be below average. We want to be above average. So we want to be above that horizontal line. The vertical line, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but the vertical line, I have the value down at the bottom there of $11,945.31. That is the average expenditure per pupil for all of the districts in Hamilton County. So the average district in Hamilton County spends $11,945.31 per student. So if that's the vertical line, you would want to be close to that. You want to be close to the average. You can see that to the left means you're spending below the average, to the right, you're spending above the expenditure per pupil. So really the ideal quadrant that you'd want to be in is this second quadrant, which tells us your performance index is high, it's above average, and your expenditure per pupil is below average. And so that you can see, I did label these. Indian Hill, we would expect their expenditures per pupil to be higher than ours, and they are. They're $17,448.37 that I have. It's on that chart on the lower left. So you can see you have Indian Hill, their PI score is 107.96, and I won't read everything through the chart, but it's no coincidence that these districts are the same as the ones from the chart that Garth pulled up. The expenditures per pupil versus the PI, and there's a lot that's involved in that. It's a community that values education, or there's a lot that goes into that. So I'm not trying to show that there's a correlation by any means. What I'm trying to show is that we have a good story. If you look at where we are, Loveland is right here. Loveland is the performance index is 101.11, which is quite a bit above the average in Hamilton County. Our expenditure per pupil is $11,180.45, which is below the average expenditure per pupil in Hamilton County. So the purpose of this is just kind of dipping my toe in the water for the community and the board to see where we are. It's important that we tie the conversation we just had, tying it in financially, and what does that mean? And to me, I use the expression getting bang for your buck. This is pretty good bang for your buck, and it's a good return on the investment. The next slide, I just expanded the one Andrea had on her presentation. I won't spend much time on it other than to say again, this 1.6% of students not tested, that speaks volumes for how hard we work to get a hold of our families and get a hold of those kids to be a part of the state assessment. And so again, it's just a kudos to everybody that was here doing the work. The next slide is really granular, but what you have, this is all of the districts in the state of Ohio. And if you look at the average PI score is 89.37. That's that lower horizontal line. The average performance index is 89.37. The vertical line is the average expenditure per pupil in the state of Ohio. And there's about 608 districts in the state of Ohio. The average expenditure per pupil is $11,258.51. So looking at the average expenditure per pupil for the state of Ohio, you'll see that Loveland is below that. We spend less than the average of all of the districts in the state of Ohio. And the other axes that I put in there, the upper horizontal axis is where we are in our PI, which is 101. And then the vertical axis, we're basically right on the vertical axis. We're pretty much the average. So again, I would say we are a very good bang for your buck, even when you compare the state of Ohio. And where that comes, it's great questions that Eileen and Kevin and Eric and everybody asked. What are we doing for the social economic hardship kids? What are we doing to provide for them? And so that's what we need to dig into. That's where we need to get a little bit more granular and see what we can do. But I just wanted to dip my toe in the water a little bit about our finances and where we are. This is 2019. I don't have any reason to believe it's going to change, because looking at our PI score for this year, we're still, we are, you have Wyoming, Madeira, Marymount, and Indian Hill, and then Wayne, who's up north, but in region 13, but we're right there. We're right kind of in the same. Yes.
Mike, one quick question. Just to clarify, these charts came out of a piece of standard software that you use, that other districts use. And it's not a measurement. It's not a graph that you came up with. It's a standard way of looking at comparative performances.
Right.
This
is what I'll be using, because what you want to do is make sure you're using the same data. You want to make, and Rob and I will be using the data and going through it. But every chart I put up here, it's tough to see it on here, but it'll say the source, the Ohio Department of Education. This is every district in the state of Ohio is reporting through an EMIS system their data. And this is not generated by me. This is generated by the state's office.
So if you tie back together again, the comment, I forget even the name of the measurement, but the rating of kindergarten kids, right? So that everybody comes in at about the same level. The return on the investment of tax dollars is really represented over time by the performance index. We see growth in the capability of these young folks because of, I'm not sure all the factors, but clearly what we do here in the district. And if I think about ROI, just return on investment, maybe this isn't the best use of the term in the education setting, but the return is growth in kids' knowledge and performance for the tax dollars that we're spending on it. Sounds like a really good story.
Yeah, and I think The beauty I have is I get to tell the good story that other people did the hard work for. But I think it's important we do that. And I think it's important that we communicate. Rob and I, we will work and determine what's the best way to communicate. And every communication, it would be great to put a little bit of financials so people can see where we are and how we're doing. And quite frankly, we're doing really, really well academically, and you can see why. We have people working hard, and our families, when we call on our families respond. And it's a great community that responds to the work that our people do and our staff. There's no coincidence that half of our staff live in the district because they know it's a great district and it's a great community.
Well, I think it's just, I think it's imperative that you keep telling the story factually, that I think people maybe need to see maybe more clearly than they might have seen in the last year or so. It's never lost on me that the percentage of taxpayers who don't have kids in our public schools is the majority of the taxpayers. So helping them understand where that money is going and what it's helping to produce, I think is an important message to have out there. And I know you've got plans to do other pieces of data going forward, but it's good stuff, I think.
And I just want to piggyback a little bit on what Kevin said. Do you mind just rolling back just the first, second, and third slide? I just did the quick, this was 2019. All of these districts dropped in their PI scores to the next slide, which is 2021. And in my math, we dropped less than most of those other districts, which goes back to the work that you guys did. One more point on the next slide. I'd like to know who pays $42,000 per year per student.
I thought somebody was going to ask. I had the answer. No, forget it.
Is it?
What's that?
So like 5 kids there?
Oh, it could be the one where it's only got a couple kids. Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting.
They've got 9.
Yeah. They fly them into the island. and
Right, they have to bring everything in by ferry and,
Yeah. So what I was going to do is, first of all, say thank you very much to our building administrators. I'm going to review the COVID dashboard. You are the ones who put the numbers in this dashboard, so you probably know these numbers. And I know you have families that maybe would like to see you for dinner. So if you would like, this is your chance to move.
Thank you, guys.
And I say thank you very, very much. Austin, you have to stay. We're almost there.
Austin a homework pass for tomorrow to hand to his teachers. Yeah, because he probably went from soccer practice
Free
to
piece of pizza.
here,
We'll
and yeah.
Yeah, we'll see what Mr. Reed can do. What do you need, Austin? Free parking pass or? Well, the COVID dashboard, I think it's important we do touch base. I'm going to let Dr. Swetchenow do a lot of the heavy lifting simply because with the medical advisory board, we did get into some good information. I want Eric to be able to present that clearly. But the COVID dashboard, again, if you look at where we are, we have 1 positive at the primary, you had 1 at the high school, so 2 total positive, which really is extraordinary. The close contacts, we had 2 at the primary, 3 at the high school for a total of 5. I put this chart up simply because when you see student self-monitoring, if we did not have the masking at K through 6, you would have the LECC all the way up to LIS. So that would give you 79, 84 students would be quarantined. They wouldn't be self-monitoring, they'd be quarantining. The low numbers at the middle school and the high school leads us to believe that we had thrown out an estimate that about 80% of our students are vaccinated. And that was based on what the school nurse has seen. And she would be the one in the front lines noticing it. So those numbers I think are low simply because we do have a higher number of students that are vaccinated. So with that, I will turn over the next slide to Dr. Swetch, next couple slides to Dr. Swetchenow. And
There's just two more, so I promise I won't keep everybody too long. This really is a reflection of our 4 local counties. The right side is as of September 20th. The left side is about a month later, as of October 17th. And you can see both that we opened our schools right in the beginning of this kind of upward curve in cases. And now where we are a month after, or 2 months after schools really opened. In the past month, we've had about a 50% drop in the number of cases per 100,000 people over the past 7 days. We're still in what's considered the red area, which is a cutoff of 100 cases per 100,000 people. So we're double that. We're still clearly at a high rate of spread in our community, but in an area where we've dropped significantly, that we're 50% less than we were a month ago. So the hope is that that trend continues and continues fairly quickly. I bring that up because when we talk about where we were in schools before school started, we were in the kind of like 10 to 25 number per 100,000. And it's one of the things that we've talked about as part of the medical advisory board as our continuing policy for mandating masks. What does that look like, and why would we change the policy? I think that Mike has reflected that that's one of the most frequent questions that he gets from people is, okay, well, what's the policy and when would you change it and why? So again, the medical advisory board's been very helpful because we've had participation of doctors from Children's Hospital, including Dr. Frank, who's in charge of the Gamble Institute for Vaccine Development. So he's very knowledgeable about where we are in vaccines and approval of vaccines for the pediatric age group. Initially, a few weeks ago, he was hopeful that it would be approved by the end of October. He seemed maybe a little bit more pessimistic, but still thinks it'll be approved within the month of November and before Thanksgiving break. Just to give everybody an idea of what timeline looks like, if that was the case and you went out and got a vaccine on day 1, it's still 3 weeks until you can get a second vaccine, and it's still 2 weeks after that until you're considered to be fully vaccinated. So 5 weeks from the date that the vaccine is available would be theoretically the very, very first opportunity for somebody to be fully vaccinated. So the question then becomes in the decision-making framework. The thing that we've talked about the most is the second in that list, when the vaccine is available for younger students might be an appropriate time for the mask mandate to be lifted. And we see that because of the behavioral difference between the 7th, 8th, and high school, where there's been a significantly lower number of close contacts, and I'm sorry, cases, close contacts, and quarantines because of the way that the quarantine rules are written. If you've been vaccinated, you don't need to quarantine. You can do self-monitoring. If you're wearing a mask, you don't need to quarantine. You can do self-monitoring. The younger children obviously haven't had the chance to be vaccinated yet. So when that changes, there's an opportunity to review where we stand. The first one would be another opportunity to review where we stand is when cases reach an acceptable level. And I don't think we've defined what that level is. It's clearly not where we are now. But if the level drops to one that there's no evidence that the community transmission is significant, that we've seen for several weeks that we're not having spread in schools, that would be an appropriate time to consider changing the mask mandate. And my personal biggest worry with that is, we started the school year with, we strongly recommend that you wear masks, and 80% of those unvaccinated children didn't. If we change the policy and say, well, it's not mandated anymore, but we still strongly recommend it, I would fear that our numbers would drop significantly below 80% before we had the protection from vaccination. And then the last one that we've discussed is if the quarantine guidelines are adjusted in some way, meaning that potential exposure in school, even if you were unvaccinated, would not automatically lead to quarantines. You could self-monitor for symptoms. And that's been roughly discussed, but is nowhere soon about to happen. So that's kind of my update on where we are and how the decision-making process looks like.
Yeah, Eric, something you said kind of connected with me because I've been I take the weekly dashboards and I build a trend out of them. And I do a rough estimate of, by building, percentage of cases versus percentage of the population. So for example, at LMS, my estimation accounts for 14% of the total number of cases that we've had. And guess what? It's 15% of the student population.
Yeah.
And you see that building by building by building, kind of reflective maybe that one strategy is working over here and another strategy, the vaccines are working over here. There's a couple of buildings that have some anomalies in them where there's a disconnect. Might be one-time things. I'll send that to you. You can look at it. But I think it speaks to your point about, just being mindful about when to make that call.
Now, the other thing I want to point out, I've really centered my whole discussion on limiting the number of students that are out of seats, keeping kids in school. If you look at the primary school, for example, where we have 1 positive and 2 close contacts, and we saw that's great. For the teachers that have the 2 close contacts and the 1 positive, they're now calling home, they're providing instruction online. It's still where we have to limit the number of kids that are out of seats so we can provide all the great things we just talked about. And so that's where my mindset is always, we need to keep these kids in class. And to Dr. Swetchenau's point, the vaccine, hopefully the quarantine guidelines will stay the same, grades 7 through 12. I have one parent that emails me and very respectful and just is asking those questions. When do we come out of the mask? And I think when you look at the data at grades 7 through 12, it's not any worse. In fact, a little better than the lower grades that are masked, which means one of 2 things, that vaccines work and maybe that's going to help us. And so we're looking at it. I know it sure helps having Dr. Swetchenau and the medical advisor board, the physicians from Children's, Judy Leamy, Kevin Leamy, Jesse. I think we've done really, really well. We just need to make sure we're holding on so that we can continue to do the good work that we do. So with that, so ends my report.
Mr. Broadwater, board members, are we ready to let Austin talk? Okay, we are, I will just make a note, the administrator reports that are on the agenda, those are ones that are on board docs. They are available for board members to read. They are not reports that are given this evening unless there are questions as items come up from those administrator reports. So Austin, you are up.
Right here. So today I'm going to be doing pre-K through 12th grade because Nicole's not here today. So to start, as part of the PBIS Student Recognition Program, LECC will celebrate its first round of kindergarten Tiger Cubs in the News at the end of October. These Tiger Cubs are selected by their teachers based on demonstrations of the core values, care, respect, and responsibility. Students will receive a certificate and a terrific tiger bracelet for their as recognition. LPS and LES are preparing to celebrate more terrific tigers during the month of October. This monthly celebration that starts in September allows students an opportunity to be recognized for the positive things that they do at school every day. On October 5th, several schools, students, and faculty dressed in camouflage to honor Mr. Rich Peabody, who was a fantastic custodial team member at LHS, who passed away a couple of weeks ago. Huge thanks to the library paraprofessional, Mrs. Mary Tobias, for putting on an awesome book fair for the LES and LPS students. Students attending these book fairs donated books to the Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and these books were then organized by LES teacher Mrs. Melissa Prenger and my teammate, sophomore Brady Burns. Almost $3,500 was raised for this amazing cause. LES has begun their first compassion project called Socktober. Students will be collecting socks throughout the month of October to be donated to local shelters. I would like to congratulate LES Assistant Principal Mrs. Jane Miller on being nominated for the Life Changer of the Year award. Students and staffs, kindergarten through fourth grade, had a blast participating in the Loveland Fall Homecoming Theme Days, and I'll speak more about these Spirit Days in a moment. The LEPTA Annual Walkathon, which happened a couple weeks ago, was another huge success. Our community exceeded the goal of $40,000, actually by 111%. The money goes to support building projects, field trips, student events, and enriching experiences for all kids preschool through fourth grade. Kindergarten and fourth grade teachers continue to work on refining instructional practices, including learning about the science of reading, fine-tuning checkpoint assessments, which were talked about earlier, and completing CPR training. Okay, now to LES and LMS. The LIS Junior Help Squad was just the recently nominated fifth graders just began work. The advisors are Mrs. Robin Purdon, which is the LIS school counselor, and the school psychologist, Mr. Noah Gilbert. LMS just completed Manufacturing Day on October 1st. They partnered with NOV in Dayton to offer students the opportunity to learn more about the diverse and growing numbers of careers in manufacturing. Students could sign up for 2 virtual sessions that were held in the media center. In particular, Mrs. Broderick's IT and Mr. R. Blaster's STEM students were able to make connections with their work in class with future opportunities. This exploration will continue during Tiger Time, where the students that attended these virtual sessions will learn more about the 16 identified career groups. Big thank you to the career and college counselor, Mr. Mitchell, for making this happen for all the students that participated. I also wanted to personally recognize Mr. Mitchell for his initiative in Career Tuesday, which is at LHS, and he gives candy to kids that come up and learn more about careers. He asks them questions, they answer the questions, and they get candy as appreciation for coming up. And I think it's really helpful. A bunch of students really enjoy it. The Caps for the Cure is a fundraiser that LIS and LMS are participating in. It's to raise money for The Cure Starts Now, and it's a charity that helps pay for research for eradicating childhood brain tumors. And one of Loveland's own second grader, Grant Wolf, passed away last year from a brain tumor. And students and staff paid $1 to wear a hat on Friday, September 24th, and the 2 campuses that participated raised over $1,000. So Spirit Week, which LES, I believe, also participated in, and LPS, with LIS and LMS all participated in 5 different dress-up days on the week of September 27th. There was PJ Day, Decades Day, Grade Color Day, Tiger Spirit Day, and Favorite Team Jersey Day. Congratulations to Harper Lutz, Andrew Bailey, and Harper Smith, who received a positive office referral. I believe that was LIS. And now to athletics. LIS Runners Club meets every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and we heard from them earlier. Volleyball, I was really impressed to read this. All 3 teams had an extremely successful season. 7th grade volleyball were tournament champs. 8th grade volleyball were undefeated, 23-0, and were also ECC season and tournament champs. And then the orange volleyball also did very well, runner-ups in the ECC. Football, there's only 3 more weeks in the season. 8th grade has been doing really well with a record of 4-2, and they have been improving a lot. Tennis just finished the season with a winning record. Cross country, girls have won the Little Miami, Sycamore, Milford, Hopewell, and Kings Invitationals. They beat Mason, one of their main rivals, 3 out of the 4 times this year. And boys have also done really good. battling Nagel and Mason programs. The boys were champions at the Little Miami, Milford, and Hopewell meets, so they did very well as well. LMS cheer is working more and more with LHS cheer to, and I'm sure Nicole could talk more about this, but they work together, and it was a lot of fun to see, not even just, or the LMS cheer along with all the, I'm sure they were probably LPS and LES cheer all working together at the homecoming game against, what was that, Walnut Hills, I believe. It was a lot of fun to see them all work together. November 17th through 19th is Camp Kern for LIS fifth graders. Juniors and seniors were given the opportunity to apply to help out these fifth graders, and I'm sure those people will be announced in the next couple of days. High school now, homecoming was a huge success for student council and really the whole student body. Mrs. Partridge, or Kelly Partridge, Mrs. Jen Dell, Mr. Richard Ernst, and Mrs. Lisa Brinkman, and Mrs. Katie Burkett all worked extremely hard and were very dedicated to make homecoming week an absolute blast for us, the students. We had the highest level of student involvement and incredible turnouts at the homecoming parade, the Powder Puff games, and the dance. Caroline Staley, who was the first vice president of the board for student council, along with all the other student council members, did a great job with planning and setting up and taking down at the dance. So at 11 o'clock, we were all taking it down. The seniors finished first in a close battle with the juniors in the homecoming class competition, with notable victories in Allie Ginder's cutest dog contest, the dress up days, and male cheerleading. The fall athletic season is coming to an end, and students are participating in senior nights to recognize the graduating athletes. Men's varsity soccer won their first playoff game last night and face off against Lakota East on Saturday. Football's last game is this Friday against Winton Woods, which is one of the best teams in the ECC. Exploration Wednesday happened last Wednesday, a week from today, in which each grade were able to participate in different opportunities or activities, sorry. So seniors got to either engage in a senior service project, job shadow, or think about college visits. 10th or sophomores and juniors had the choice between either the PSAT, the practice ACT, and or 2 job-related tests. 9th grade got to do team building, some and an assembly, including a hypnotist. Many sophomores and juniors will take the ACT this weekend, and I know they'll be ready thanks to Exploration Wednesday and all the work taken by our school counselors to make that happen. I also wanted to shout out Mrs. Teresa Bossy, who is going back to teaching this year. She's actually my teacher, and she has gone out of her way to add ACT prep, including the writing and reading sections, into her curriculum every day so we can get some extra practice, which has been really helpful. I had the opportunity to go with my classmates in Mrs. Amy Aspinwall's AP Environmental Science class to the Little Miami River to collect and analyze data on species, which was a lot of fun. We learned a lot. And finally, Reagan Bingham and the rest of student council put on an extremely successful club fair on Monday, October 18th. Students had the opportunity to join organizations like LHS Ski Club, Women in Science and Engineering, Spirit Club, and the brand new LHS Golf Club, and many more. That's all I've got for today.
Great job.
Thank you, Austin. That was great. It was well worth waiting for us. I'm not sure if you feel the same way, but we really appreciate hearing about your personal experience as a student, the opportunities for students. And, I know I appreciated hearing a lot about all the things that our students and our staff do for each other and for our community. So that was really great. And you are welcome to head on home if you would like. I have a very short report, but we have some other things to do. So we really appreciate your time. You're welcome to stay, but you're welcome to head home. No, you can.
We have some really exciting policies. stuff to talk about.
Yeah, if you get bored during the policies, I'll catch
worry
you up
about
on
it.
them
You're
later
good.
if you decide you need to leave.
all-
So thank you very much.
And also remember what we owe you. It's either a parking spot or a pizza. I'm not sure where we go here.
Yeah, somebody said parking spot over there. I'm not sure about that. To watch this over here. He is.
And it is
Very
on
good.
video. so-
Yes. Well, it wasn't me. I know that. I have a very short board president report.
That was really short. Oh.
Thanks, Michelle. Very quickly. First of all, the Valentine Lady program is hoping this year to get the Valentine Lady back in the schools after the beginning of the year. We weren't able to last year, but I did just want to let you know, and particularly let our listeners know, that the Valentine card design contest has started. Information is available at the Little Miami River Chamber Alliance there, and there will be some poetry writing workshops soon. That is also a part of the Valentine program. So if you want more information, contact me or contact the Little Miami Chamber Alliance. They have the information about the Valentine Lady program. I don't think I need to remind anybody at the table here, but there is candidate night tomorrow here in this building. And so again, reminding our audience that board candidates will be presenting and answering questions tomorrow evening. Board members should have received OSBA materials in the mail. And I think Mr. Giuffre has a report maybe later in his report for us at some point. I have some Great Oaks material here if anyone would like to see it, information about individual students, but I will share that with you later. You can take it home with you for your reading pleasure. And then I do have information about the policies, but I will share that as we move into the policies. I'll offer very quickly, the way Michelle did. Are there other board member reports for this evening?
Very quickly, the open issues list that we've talked about previously is now up on the website.
Anything else? Well, then we get to the fun part of policies. The next item will be a resolution, and it is concerning policies. If we could have a resolution to approve those policies, and then I will have some discussion.
So moved.
Mr. Doherty moved. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Pettit seconded. There is a long list. It's slightly shorter than it was when we started out. If you will recall, this was a list of policies that we tried to get into a while ago, found that there were some issues with the format that we had, took them off the table, brought them back to the table. And so these are policies that Neola has referenced to us that we need to get on our books. Many of these are simple legal language issues. Either according to law, some of the language needs to change. A lot of the changes have to do with identifying positions as harassment officers and those kinds of things, as opposed to people's names. So that's what's happening in, I would say, half of these policies. I will get back to the very first one in a minute. We'll do that one last. Policy 3124, policy 2240 has legal language. We had language that was legal when the policy was passed. It is not any longer legal to limit requests for religious allowances to be made only at lunchtime. So that's why the change in that language. 3124 simply has a paragraph removed. The reason the paragraph is removed is it appears in a separate policy. That's about an employment contract. Several of the financial ones, the 6,000s, those simply had some legal language to clear up. And then the same thing happened with 8500 and 8510. Those are food services and wellness. So if you've had a chance to look at them and look at all the changes, it really is things that were required by law to be changed. The only one that's sitting out there by itself is the 0145, which is a board policy. It has to do with appointment of board members. So the suggestion that is on the table is to remove the sentence concerning interviewing board candidates. And I believe that Mr. Doherty has a sentence that he would propose instead. Mr. Doherty, would you like to read it or would you like me to read it?
The suggestion is the board shall review all interested candidates' submissions to ascertain their qualifications and may interview selected candidates prior to a vote to appoint.
I'll say that again. At this point, the board would consider that sentence, if the board wishes to add that into the policy, replace the lined out sentence, that would be a friendly amendment to the resolution that we have on the table for that policy. And if there are any other questions or concerns about policies, say so, we can also add them in as friendly amendments. Discussion, questions, concerns.
Do you
Eileen.
mind just reading it one more time?
Sure. The current policy says the board shall interview all interested candidates to ascertain their qualifications. We came in here with that struck out completely. I have suggested, in lieu of striking it out completely, the board shall review all interested candidates' submissions. Within the policy, the prior sentence or so says that interested parties send a letter in expressing their interest in the role. So the board shall review all interested candidates' submissions to ascertain their qualifications and may interview selected candidates prior to a vote to appoint. So it's saying we're going to look at everything that comes in, and we may make a decision to interview. Doesn't say on what basis, but we don't have to.
And the board could still choose to interview all. It just simply doesn't limit them. Again, I will repeat that we went through this at one point and interviewed 32 people. We came up with 2 very good candidates, but we did interview 32.
The only thing that I would add, and I want the feedback of Eileen, Kathy, and Michelle on this more than Kevin and I. Would Kevin's amendment be better read as shall interview some candidates? Meaning, do we want an interview as a step in the process, or do we want the choice of an interview as a step in the process? Not meaning shall interview all, but
it says, my wording says may interview selected candidates. Eric is suggesting shall interview selected candidates.
And again, I'm sorry, and again, just meaning, and I want your feedback on this, and my opinion is less valuable. You've been through it. Was the interview process, does forcing the board members to go through that interview process, no matter which candidates they choose to interview, would that be helpful, even though it's harder?
I don't know that it would be helpful to constrain a board to have to do it. I think calling it out in the policy allows boards to consider doing it. I'm always leery about forcing a board that's maybe not me in the future to do something, but it certainly gives them the option. It is not legally required. The legal requirements are covered in the policy that you have to do it within a certain period of time. And this is the other issue with interviewing. The time frame is quite limited by law of when you can do it. So the shall kind of constrains them. I see Mr. Giuffre raising his hand.
Shall is a word that's typically used in law, which means you must. Doing that to yourself is typically not what you want to do in policy.
Yeah, I would say keep it
choice.
as may.
You
have
guys,
that
you guys were
choice.
there.
No, it should be
I follow
choice.
your lead.
It should be choice that leaves it wide open, I mean, not wide open, but gives us the choice or gives whoever the choice to interview all one, two, depending on resumes or applications that have been turned in.
Okay, any other questions about 0145 or any of the policies? This motion is to adopt those policies then. This would be the second or third or fourth reading of these policies. So it would be to adopt those policies, including 0145 with the struck out sentence and the sentence added that Mr. Doherty suggests. Anything else? Mr. Giuffre, can we vote on those?
Mr. Doherty?
Yes.
Ms. Pettit?
Yes.
Dr. Lorenz?
Yes.
Dr. Schweschenau?
Yes.
Mrs. Wadsworth?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Austin, was that as exciting as you had anticipated?
Good answer, Austin.
That's the wording. Thank you.
Okay, then we move to treasurer resolutions. And I'm assuming, Mr. Giuffre, that we should have a resolution concerning the financial reports. And then if there's additional report that you need for us or discussion, we can have that then. So I would move to approve the financial reports, reconciliations, and expenditures that are listed under the agenda there. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Washburn. Before we have any discussion, you have any report for us, Mr. Giuffre?
I'll make up for it next month. I do not, but I do have something after the donation.
Okay. Any questions or discussion about the financial reports? Those principles just wore us down.
Trying to be sensitive to everybody's time here.
Okay, all right, Mr. Giuffre, can we vote on that?
Dr. Lorenz?
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn?
Yes.
Ms. Pettit?
Yes.
Dr. Schweschenau?
Yes.
Mr. Doherty?
Yes.
Motion carried. The second item under treasury reports is a donation. And so we need a motion to accept a donation of a cello.
I move.
Second.
Ms. Pettit moved and Mr. Doherty seconded. Get boxed out. I didn't know it was a competition here. Okay, any questions or discussion about the cello? Who can play the cello on the board? Okay, I'm sure that it can be used by the Loveland Music Department. So Mr. Giuffre, can we vote on that?
Ms. Pettit?
Yes.
Mr. Doherty?
Yes.
Dr. Schweschenau?
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn? Is that a yes?
Yes.
Dr. Lorenz?
Yes, motion carried.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Giuffre has started screen sharing. He's got some OSBA information.
So for our non-incumbent board candidates that are still watching this tonight, and if you watch the recording, the OSBA, the Ohio School Board Association, is holding its annual member workshop at the Columbus Convention Center, November 7th through 9th. The workshop provides training for new board members, learning their way around board meetings, laws, and policies, as well as for experienced board members seeking out hot topic discussions and sharing their experiences with others. Workshop sessions, keynote speakers, and roundtable discussions can be found on the OSBA's website. Search for Capital Conference details online. If you're interested in attending, you can contact me at treasurer@lovelandschools.org or call me at 513-774-6207. That information is at the top of this slide, which is under administrative reports for tonight's board meeting. I will register you and attempt to find accommodations for you if you plan to attend, and accommodations have been taken care of for everybody else at this point. So you can wait till the 3rd, or you can call me before. Let me know your intentions. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. So that is for possible board members. Okay, very good. Thank you. Anything else for Mr. Giuffre? All right, then we have Director of Human Resources. And so we would need a motion to approve the resolutions of the Director of Human Resources, including resignations and employment of certified classified homebound substitute and supplemental positions for the 2021-2022 school
I
year.
move.
I heard Dr. Schweschenau heard.
He overrated me.
And Ms. Pettit seconded. it is a competition over at that side of the table. We'll start with asking Mr. Collier if he has any report in addition to his report that is on his list of candidates that's on board docs.
Thanks, Dr. Lorenz. I do just have a couple of things I'd like to point out to the group. If you take a look at, am I muted? I'm good. If you would take a look at section 2, there is basically this is subject area leaders. And I just want to point out that these aren't new positions. We're not adding any new positions. What you'll see is that they're at LECC, these were unfilled spots. These are supplemental positions that people take on to lead different things throughout the school day. And so for LECC, we have 2 of those there, one for ELA and one for math. And then the section B here, you will see that there is just a change at LES on how they want to structure this. In the past, they have had one person who has been the subject area leader for 2 different grade levels. And so it is becoming increasingly difficult for them to be managing 2 different grade levels when they only teach one of the 2 grade levels. So you'll see that some of these positions that were a 1.0, or they were having the whole supplemental, it's reduced to a 0.5, and then there's an additional person for the other grade level to take that. So it is additional folks, but the supplemental itself isn't costing the district anymore. It's just being reallocated in a different way, making sure to point that out. And then I would like to, there are a couple of things that are in yellow. So if you guys had, these are things that just got put on here recently. So I just want to draw that to your attention. It is standard types of things. In section C, there is some home instruction that we're looking at for a student at the high school. And then also we have some substitutes that we added here to be able to get rolling, because this is leading me into the next thing that I want to talk about, which is substitute pay. And if you take a look at section E, since 2017, we haven't had any kind of an increase in substitute pay for our district. And as you guys probably have heard, there is a shortage of folks to substitute at all aspects involving education and everywhere that you go. We know that people are really needing people to work, and this is something that is not, schools are not immune to that as well. So our substitute teacher pay, that's the one that I want to make sure to highlight. We were at $85 a day. And for the board members in board docs for you, there was a comparison document. So we were one of 3 schools in the area that were as low as 85. That was the lowest. So I'm recommending that we up that to $100 a day from 85, which puts us in a much more competitive kind of market. There are still plenty of schools that offer more than $100 a day. We just didn't want to be at the very bottom of the list, which is where we were before. And then if you look down at all of these other substitute pieces that are the hourly wages, I am asking and recommending that we just increase those by $1.25 an hour, because they haven't been updated since 2017, and there was just a need for us to be more current and to be in line with area school districts just as ours. Do you guys have any questions about that?
Questions? So that substitute pay chart is included under the resolution here of what we would adopt.
That's correct.
Where will that new substitute pay chart exist once a resolution is passed? In other words, does that just show up in your office? Does that show up? Will the new list be published in the minutes on board docs, or where does it show up?
I am fine that once it is passed and it is actually that those are the rates, I am fine with us including it in the minutes, so it's available for people to view. Of course, the whole reason for us to increase substitute pay in all aspects are that we want people to know what that rate is, and interested folks, we want them to be able to be a part of coming and help us do the work that we need. So I am open to whatever the board would like to have for us to be able to put that in a place where people can view it. I am open and willing to do that. Do you guys think that after this, after we are finished, me moving it into in board docs, moving it into a view that's available for the public, that way it can be visible for them? Does that sound good?
Is there a place that it resides generally on the HR webpage? In other words, how does or does a person who's a substitute go through, there's a system that substitutes go through to be assigned, correct?
Right. That would be through the application process, but we certainly can post this in an effort to this to be able to have an outreach to gain folks. We can put it on the HR section of the website. I can work with Mr. Setters to make sure that we get that done. Sounds great.
And for the teacher substitutes through Hamilton County Consortium, they obviously would be able to let their substitutes that are subbing in our schools to let them know what the rate is. So they certainly would do that as well.
I think that makes the most sense to publish it on the HR website. Then it's available to anybody that wants to know, and they don't have to hunt in the minutes to find when we did it and where
Sure.
it is. I think it's that way the people who are most concerned with the numbers would find it where they would expect to find it, I think.
I think it's a great suggestion, and I'll work with Mr. Setters to get it done.
Yeah, and I'd suggest as a corollary to that, if there are other things that could be dealt with in a similar fashion, make them easier to find, that'd be a service to everybody, I think.
Great.
Anything else on this first item, the human resources items? Mr. Giuffre, can we vote on that?
Yes.
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 Yes, motion carried. And I believe our final item is also under human resources. And we would need a motion to approve the exempt employee handbook effective August 1st, 2021 through July 31st, 2023.
I would move to do that.
Dr. Swetchenow moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Doherty seconded. You're saving yours for. You're saving yours for.
I was trying to save it, yeah.
Still German.
That's what we're saving it for. That's what we're saving it for. I also believe that Mr. Carler has a report. It's you, Mr. Carler, not Mr. Broadwater, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, report on
Yes.
this exempt employee handbook.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Lorenz. For this particular section, for the exempt employee handbook, we made some changes. I want to make sure to note those changes for the board and for anybody else who is listening or will be listening into our meeting. And basically, the only change to the handbook was a classification change. In the old handbook, or the existing one until hopefully this one gets voted on tonight, there were 3 different classifications for folks who were in the exempt category. You were either on Schedule A, Schedule B, or Schedule C. We didn't have anybody currently working in Schedule B. The majority of our folks were all working in Schedule A, and we only had 4 people working in Schedule C. We, in looking at updating our handbooks and taking a look at all these different pieces, after we've gone through LEA and OPSI and admin and now finally exempt, we wanted to streamline some things. So in working with Mr. Giuffre and with Mr. Broadwater, we have come up with that we just want a single schedule for all of the exempt employees. And just like we did with the Teachers Association, with extending out the number of possible steps that you could have within that schedule, we did that as well. So people weren't getting to the highest category at a short amount of time and knowing the number of years that they possibly could be working with us. So we went through a process of taking all of the exempt employees and moving to this new schedule. And in your information that you have in the board notes, it spells out at the bottom of that schedule how we went about moving folks who were on Schedule A, who were on Schedule C, and then some folks who only work 195 days and what that process was. So I just wanted to make sure to point that out. The rest of the exempt handbook is as is. There wasn't any other changes to that. This particular piece, which happens to be the last page of the exempt employee handbook, is where all the changes are.
Any questions or discussion? For the purpose of any audience members who are listening to us, if they look at that exempt employee handbook, the first thing it does is define what an exempt employee is. So in case you were thinking, what are they talking about? That is in there, as well as all the information concerning those employees. No other questions or discussion? Mr. Giuffre, can we vote on that?
Dr. Swetchno?
Yes.
Mr. Doherty?
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn?
Yes.
Dr. Lorenz?
Yes.
Mrs. Pettit?
Yes.
Motion carried. Is there any other business that needs to come before this board? Austin says no, please.
Mhm.
All right, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn. I move. Ms. Pettit moved. Is there a second? Nobody's seconding. We can't adjourn.
Sorry. I
I'll
would,
second the motion. And it's not debatable. So Mr. Giuffre, can we vote on adjourning?
Mrs. Pettit?
Yes.
Dr. Lorenz?
Yes.
Mr. Doherty?
Yes.
Dr. Swetchno?
yes.
Mrs. Washburn?
Yes.
And so I would declare this meeting adjourned at 9:27. And thank you all for your attention and your hard work this evening.